Hey everybody, this is Sleepy Crime, and today I'm gonna help you. I know you want to fall asleep to this video, so before you do, put a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. By the way, where are you from and what time are you watching? Make yourself comfortable and relax. James Lee DiMaggio Jr. had long been considered a trusted presence in the Anderson family's life. Often referred to as Uncle Jim by 16-year-old Hannah Anderson, he was not related by blood, but held a close bond with her parents, particularly her father, Brett Anderson. Their friendship dated back nearly 2 decades to when Brett and Christina Anderson were a young couple raising a family in Southern California. DiMaggio, a network technician living in Boulevard, California, frequently spent time with the Andersons. He had even taken the children on trips, such as one to Hollywood and another to Yosemite. DiMaggio attended family gatherings and supported the family during difficult times, including Brett and Christina's separation. To the outside world, he appeared to be a loyal and generous friend, often going out of his way to help Christina and her 2 children, Hannah and Ethan. Behind this familiarity, however, subtle tensions existed. In the months leading up to the events of August 2013, DiMaggio's relationship with Hannah had begun to attract concern. Some of Hannah's friends later recalled that she had confided in them about feeling uncomfortable around him. She mentioned that he would sometimes say odd things or make her feel uneasy, but no one suspected the depth of DiMaggio's fixation. The Anderson family trusted DiMaggio, allowing him access to their home and their children. This trust would become central to what unfolded, blurring the lines between familiarity and danger. On the surface, DiMaggio maintained the image of a protective, benevolent figure. Beneath that surface, he harbored a growing obsession that would ultimately erupt into violence. His home in Boulevard, a rural area east of San Diego, became a retreat not only for himself, but also a place he offered to others. There, he invited Christina and the children under the pretense of a farewell gathering, as he claimed to be preparing to move to Texas for a new start. It was an invitation extended from a man who had become like family. That trust, cultivated over years of friendship, would soon be broken in a way no one could have foreseen. On August 3, 2013, Christina Anderson accepted an invitation from James DiMaggio to visit his home in Boulevard, California. She brought along her 2 children, Hannah, age 16, and Ethan, aged 8. DiMaggio had told the family he was preparing to move to Texas and wanted to spend one last evening with them before leaving. The gathering was framed as a farewell, a final chance to enjoy each other's company before he started a new chapter. Boulevard, a sparsely populated area nestled near the Mexican border, was quiet and isolated. DiMaggio's home sat on a large rural property, surrounded by scrubland and distant hills. For Christina and the kids, the visit was expected to be a simple, friendly get-together. But from the outset, there were subtle signs that the night would not unfold as planned. Hannah had earlier texted friends that she didn't want to go but felt pressured. Her relationship with DiMaggio had grown uncomfortable in recent months. There were reports that he had given her unwanted attention, including comments about how she was maturing. Despite these red flags, the long-standing closeness between DiMaggio and the Andersons may have dulled the urgency of those concerns. Christina's husband, Brett Anderson, was away at the time. He later said he hadn't known about the planned visit that weekend. DiMaggio had a key to the Andersons' house and was often around even when Brett wasn't there. That level of trust was indicative of the relationship's history, but it would also facilitate DiMaggio's ability to isolate and carry out his plan. Later analysis would suggest that DiMaggio had been preparing for something more sinister. The house in Boulevard contained homemade incendiary devices, camping gear, and supplies that pointed to premeditation. He had also communicated plans to burn some belongings in a fire pit, a detail that initially seemed innocuous. That evening, something went drastically wrong. By the next morning, the property would be engulfed in flames, and the Anderson family would be torn apart. What had started as a farewell gathering would mark the beginning of a manhunt and an investigation that gripped the nation. On August 4th, 2013, firefighters responded to a blaze at James DiMaggio's home in Boulevard around 8 p.m. The fire was intense, consuming the rural structure and making initial entry difficult. By the time crews managed to gain control, the home had been reduced to a smoldering ruin. Within the charred debris, investigators found a disturbing scene that immediately raised alarms. Inside the garage, they discovered the burned remains of Christina Anderson, partially covered by a tarp. Her ankles had been bound with plastic ties, and duct tape was found nearby. She had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, and the condition of the body suggested a violent death prior to the fire. Near her, a dead dog, believed to be the family pet, was also found. A second set of remains, later identified as those of Ethan Anderson, was found elsewhere on the property. His body had been so badly burned that identification took time. DNA testing would later confirm that the skeletal remains belonged to the 8-year-old boy. The gruesome discovery shifted the case from a house fire to a double homicide investigation. Missing from the scene was 16-year-old Hannah Anderson. Authorities immediately feared the worst, that Hannah had been abducted by DiMaggio, who was nowhere to be found. His car, a blue Nissan Versa, was missing. Law enforcement issued a nationwide alert and launched a full-scale investigation. The San Diego County Sheriff's Department, the FBI, and the California Highway Patrol all joined the effort. What puzzled investigators was the apparent planning. In addition to the incendiary devices, they found evidence suggesting that DiMaggio had made deliberate efforts to delay identification and hinder rescue efforts. The bodies were concealed, and parts of the house were booby-trapped with timers and accelerants. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Media quickly descended on the scene, and the story began to unfold on national television. Interviews with neighbors revealed DiMaggio as a quiet man, known for helping friends. None had imagined he was capable of such brutality. As investigators sifted through the wreckage and information emerged about the victims, the search for Hannah became more urgent. With 2 bodies confirmed and 1 teenager missing, law enforcement believed time was running out. With the charred remains of Christina and Ethan Anderson identified and Hannah missing, authorities issued an Amber Alert on August 5th, 2013. It was the first time California activated the system to send alerts directly to cell phones, a measure intended to reach as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. The alert included a description of the suspect, James DiMaggio, his blue Nissan Versa, and the possibility that Hannah was in imminent danger. The case escalated into a multi-state manhunt. Law enforcement agencies in California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, and neighboring regions were on high alert. Border Patrol was notified, and Canadian and Mexican authorities were informed of the potential for an international crossing. The FBI joined the investigation, pooling resources to track the movements of DiMaggio. Witness reports began to trickle in. In some cases, people believed they had seen the pair at gas stations or rest stops. Each sighting prompted a flurry of activity, but most turned out to be false leads. Investigators pored over DiMaggio's digital footprint, examining his cell phone records, email accounts, and financial activity. He had abandoned his cell phone shortly after the fire and was not using credit cards, complicating efforts to trace him. DiMaggio's car had been seen traveling north along the I-15 corridor, suggesting he was headed toward the remote wilderness areas of the Pacific Northwest. His background included survival skills, and the gear found in his home suggested he may have planned to disappear into the backcountry. Authorities feared he might be attempting to keep Hannah hidden in an area difficult to search. Hannah's picture circulated across the country, on television, online, and on highway billboards. Her father, Brett Anderson, appeared in emotional interviews pleading for her safe return. The public was asked to remain vigilant and report any possible sightings. By August 7th, attention focused on the remote regions of Idaho, where DiMaggio's car would soon be discovered. The scale of the manhunt was now one of the largest in recent years, with growing urgency to locate the teen and bring DiMaggio to justice. On August 8, 2013, a critical breakthrough emerged in the search for Hannah Anderson. DiMaggio's blue Nissan Versa was located near Cascade, Idaho, in a remote area of the Frank Church River of no return wilderness. The car had been hidden under brush and lacked license plates, a deliberate attempt to avoid detection. It appeared to have been abandoned for days, and its discovery shifted the focus of the manhunt squarely to central Idaho. Inside the vehicle, authorities found camping equipment, used food wrappers, and other supplies consistent with a planned escape into the backcountry. It was clear DiMaggio had intended to travel deep into the wilderness, a region known for its rugged terrain and isolation. Search teams were deployed on foot and by air, covering vast stretches of forest. Just before the car was found, 2 horseback riders had encountered a man and a teenage girl hiking in the area. The riders described the girl as appearing scared and uncomfortable, while the man, believed to be DiMaggio, kept a close eye on her and attempted to control the interaction. The riders later said they recognized the pair after seeing the Amber Alert online and quickly contacted authorities. This tip provided a concrete lead. The horseback riders were able to guide law enforcement to the general area where they had seen DiMaggio and Hannah. The wilderness spanned millions of acres, but the combination of the vehicle discovery and the rider's account narrowed the search zone significantly. Federal and local agencies coordinated an intensive search operation. Specialized FBI teams were brought in, and helicopters scanned the region for signs of movement or campsites. Authorities believe the pair was on foot, carrying supplies, and likely trying to avoid populated areas. The horseback rider's account was a pivotal moment. It validated suspicions that DiMaggio had not harmed Hannah immediately after the fire, and that she was still alive. Their brief encounter gave searchers hope and a direction to pursue. The urgency of the mission intensified, knowing the terrain, weather, and DiMaggio's mindset could all play factors in how events would unfold. On August 10, 2013, after days of tracking and surveillance, law enforcement located a remote campsite in the Frank Church River of no return wilderness. Using information from the horseback riders and aerial reconnaissance, agents zeroed in on a secluded area near Moorhead Lake. There, they spotted what appeared to be a temporary camp and a teenage girl matching Hannah Anderson's description. The FBI organized a tactical team to approach the site. Around 5 p.m., agents moved in. The operation was swift and deliberate. As they closed in, DiMaggio reportedly spotted the agents and reached for a weapon. In response, law enforcement opened fire, killing him at the scene. Hannah was found nearby, physically unharmed but visibly shaken. Agents immediately evacuated her by helicopter to safety. She was flown to a hospital and reunited with her father, Brett Anderson. Medical personnel confirmed she had no serious physical injuries, though the psychological toll of the week-long ordeal was evident. Authorities praised her composure and credited her resilience during the harrowing experience. The campsite contained more evidence of DiMaggio's planning. Investigators found weapons, camping tools, and maps. He had also carried a handcuff key and survival materials. Despite his efforts to disappear into the wilderness, he had underestimated the combined forces of modern technology, law enforcement coordination, and alert citizens. The operation brought an end to a high-profile manhunt that had stretched from Southern California to the mountains of Idaho. DiMaggio, who had been like family to the Andersons, was now dead. His motives, while partly illuminated through later investigation, would never be fully explained. Hannah's rescue was hailed as a success story in the face of tragedy. Still, it did not erase the trauma of losing her mother and brother or the events she had endured. Authorities began interviewing her to understand the full scope of what had happened during the days she spent in captivity. Her account would provide critical insights into DiMaggio's actions and state of mind. Following the fire and the discovery of Christina and Ethan Anderson's remains, autopsies were conducted to determine the cause and manner of death. The findings revealed the extent of the violence that occurred before the house in Boulevard was engulfed in flames. Christina Anderson had suffered severe blunt force trauma to the head. Her body was found under a tarp in the garage, bound with plastic zip ties. The autopsy concluded she had been struck multiple times, likely with a crowbar or similar object. Duct tape and other binding materials were recovered from the scene, suggesting that she had been restrained prior to or during the attack. Ethan Anderson's remains posed a greater challenge. His body was found in a separate location within the burned structure and was severely charred. Dental records were required for identification, and the remains showed evidence of intense heat exposure. Due to the extent of the damage, the exact cause of death was initially unclear, but authorities concluded he had likely been murdered before the fire. The autopsy results supported the theory that DiMaggio had killed Christina and Ethan before setting the house ablaze. Investigators believed the fire was intended to destroy evidence and delay the discovery of the crimes. Accelerants and incendiary devices were found on the property, further suggesting premeditation. In addition to the two bodies, the remains of the family dog were found. The dog had been shot, another sign of DiMaggio's determination to erase all traces and leave no survivors. James DiMaggio's own autopsy confirmed he died from multiple gunshot wounds during the FBI rescue operation in Idaho. He was armed when agents confronted him. Officials stated he posed a threat, and the use of lethal force was deemed justified. These forensic findings provided clarity on the events at the Boulevard home. They confirmed the brutality of the murders and supported the timeline constructed by investigators. The results underscored the premeditated nature of the crime and revealed the violence that had unfolded before DiMaggio fled with Hannah. In the aftermath of James DiMaggio's death, investigators sought to understand what drove him to murder Christina and Ethan Anderson and abduct Hannah. As evidence was gathered from DiMaggio's home, car, and campsite, several disturbing elements began to emerge, painting a picture of a man consumed by obsession and desperation. Central to the investigation was DiMaggio's fixation on Hannah. Friends and family later revealed that he had developed an inappropriate interest in the teenager. Hannah herself confirmed that DiMaggio had made her feel uncomfortable in the months before the incident. He had told her he had a crush on her, and at least one letter from him was discovered that expressed his feelings in personal terms. In the days before the fire, DiMaggio invited Hannah to spend time alone with him. She declined, choosing instead to attend cheerleading practice. The invitation raised no immediate alarm, but it would later be seen as a possible warning sign of his intentions. Another piece of evidence involved a life insurance policy DiMaggio had taken out in 2011. The policy, worth $112,000, named Hannah's maternal grandmother as the beneficiary. This choice baffled authorities and further suggested DiMaggio had formed a distorted connection to Hannah and her family. Some speculated it may have been part of a long-term plan or an attempt to justify his closeness to them. At his home, investigators found suspicious items, incendiary devices, handcuffs, and materials for camping and concealment. The presence of these objects, combined with digital evidence, showed deliberate preparation. Search history on his computers indicated he had researched kidnapping and survival tactics. Despite the wealth of circumstantial evidence, no single explanation fully captured DiMaggio's motives. Mental health issues were considered, though he had no formal diagnosis. To those who knew him, DiMaggio had always seemed quiet and helpful, never violent. His descent into such calculated violence stunned even close friends. Ultimately, the investigation pointed to a man who blurred the lines between fantasy and reality, acting on a dangerous obsession with a teenager who had trusted him. His actions tore apart a family and shocked a nation. The Hannah Anderson case quickly became a national news story. As the details unfolded, from the fire in Boulevard to the rescue in Idaho, media coverage intensified. Major networks provided daily updates, and the public followed every development closely. The narrative of a teenager abducted by a trusted family friend, following the murder of her mother and brother, struck a chord across the country. Public sympathy for Hannah was initially overwhelming. She was portrayed as a survivor who endured the unimaginable. Vigils were held in Southern California and beyond, with people lighting candles and leaving messages of support. Her return was met with relief, and her father's emotional interviews amplified the collective sense of heartbreak and hope. However, as Hannah began to speak publicly, the tone of some media outlets shifted. In interviews given shortly after her rescue, she answered questions about her ordeal, DiMaggio's behavior, and her relationship with him. Critics scrutinized her responses, with some questioning her demeanor and others misinterpreting her answers. Online speculation grew, fueled by a mix of misinformation and misunderstanding. Social media played a significant role in shaping public perception. Hannah used platforms like Ask.fm and Facebook to communicate with peers and address rumors. She defended herself, clarified facts, and expressed grief for her mother and brother. Yet the exposure also subjected her to judgment and invasive questions, compounding her trauma. Law enforcement and experts consistently affirmed that Hannah was a victim. Authorities stated there was no evidence she had willingly gone with DiMaggio and that she had been manipulated and coerced. Her communication with him before the abduction, including text messages, was consistent with a grooming pattern, not complicity. The media's handling of the case prompted broader discussions about how young victims are portrayed. Advocacy groups highlighted the need for sensitivity and the dangers of rushing to conclusions, especially when dealing with survivors of trauma. Despite the scrutiny, many rallied in support of Hannah. Her resilience and the clarity of the investigation helped reinforce the reality. She had been abducted, traumatized, and lost two close family members. The public's attention eventually moved on, but the case remained a reference point in conversations about victim treatment in the media. In the months following her rescue, Hannah Anderson returned to a drastically changed life. She had lost her mother and younger brother, survived an abduction, and endured intense public scrutiny. Supported by her father and extended family, Hannah focused on healing and reclaiming a sense of normalcy. She returned to school and continued to engage with friends while maintaining a relatively low public profile. Authorities closed the case with finality. James DiMaggio was confirmed as the sole perpetrator. The investigation found no accomplices, and no charges were filed against anyone else. The evidence, including the forensic reports, digital records, and eyewitness accounts, formed a comprehensive picture of premeditated murder and abduction. One significant outcome of the case was the renewed focus on the Amber Alert system. California's use of the wireless emergency alert system to send notifications to cell phones was seen as instrumental in spreading awareness quickly. The technology had previously gone underutilized, but the case prompted improvements and broader implementation in other states. The story also entered popular culture. Television programs like Dateline NBC and 48 Hours aired episodes exploring the case, featuring interviews with Hannah and her family. Documentaries highlighted the investigation and rescue, emphasizing the teamwork among local and federal agencies. While media depictions varied in tone, most sought to underscore the tragedy and the survival. Hannah's own voice became part of the narrative. In selective interviews, she described her experience with clarity and strength. She emphasized that DiMaggio had betrayed her family's trust and manipulated her. These appearances helped correct misconceptions and offered insight into her recovery. Years later, the Anderson family continued to advocate for crime victims. Brett Anderson spoke about the importance of believing and protecting survivors. Hannah, though mostly private, was occasionally cited in discussions about how young victims are treated by media and the public. The case left a lasting imprint on investigative protocols, public awareness, and the handling of child abductions. It was a reminder of how predators can hide in plain sight, and how vigilance, community action, and coordinated law enforcement can bring justice, even in the most harrowing circumstances. Denise Amber Lee was born on August 6, 1986, in Englewood, Florida. She was the daughter of Rick Goff, a sergeant with the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office, and Sue Goff. Denise grew up in a family with deep roots in the community, tracing back to the town's early settlers. In high school, Denise met Nathan Lee. She was known as a quiet, studious individual, while Nathan was more outgoing. Despite their differences, they formed a strong bond and eventually married. Nathan worked multiple jobs to support the family, allowing Denise to stay home and care for their two young sons, Noah and Adam. The Lee family resided in Northport, Florida, a rapidly growing community in Sarasota County. They rented a home in a neighborhood that was considered safe and family-friendly. Denise's days were filled with caring for her children and maintaining their household. She embraced her role as a mother, finding joy in the everyday moments with her sons. Tampa Bay Times. On January 17, 2008, Denise's day began like any other. She was at home with her children, tending to household tasks. The weather was unseasonably warm, prompting her to open the windows to let in the fresh air. She spoke with Nathan around 11:20 a.m., discussing the pleasant weather and their plans for the day. This would be their last conversation. Unbeknownst to Denise, a man named Michael King was driving through the neighborhood that day. King, an unemployed plumber, was facing personal difficulties, including the impending foreclosure of his home. He had no prior criminal record, but had exhibited increasingly erratic behavior in the months leading up to that day. As Denise went about her day, King was in the vicinity, observing the neighborhood. The events that would unfold later that day would forever change the lives of the Lee family and the Northport community. January 17, 2008, began as a typical day for Nathan Lee. He left the house around 8:30 a.m., heading to his job at a local HVAC company. Denise remained at home with their sons, ages 2 and 6 months. It was a warm, breezy day in Northport, Florida, unusual for mid-January. Denise took advantage of the weather by opening the windows. She spoke with Nathan shortly before noon, sounding cheerful and relaxed. Around 3:30 p.m., Nathan returned home. He expected to find Denise with the children. Instead, he walked into a disturbing silence. The television was on. The front door was unlocked. One child was sleeping in his crib. The other played quietly. Denise was nowhere to be found. Her phone, keys, and purse were in the house, untouched. The open windows struck Nathan as odd, considering how security-conscious Denise usually was. Nathan quickly called his father-in-law, Rick Goff, a Charlotte County Sheriff's Sergeant. Goff instructed him to call 911. Within minutes, local police arrived. They searched the house and the surrounding area. Nathan tried to remain calm, but dread crept in. Denise would never leave the children alone, not even for a moment. As the minutes passed, the situation became increasingly urgent. Investigators questioned neighbors. Some reported seeing a dark green Camaro near the house earlier that day. Others mentioned a man lingering near the property. No one had seen Denise leave or heard any struggle. Authorities feared she had been taken against her will. The search intensified, spreading throughout the region. By evening, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement joined the effort. Denise's information was entered into the National Missing Persons Database. Police canvassed neighborhoods, handed out flyers, and spoke with potential witnesses. Nathan gave interviews to local news outlets, pleading for help. As night fell, the uncertainty deepened. Denise's disappearance had gone from a family concern to a full-scale criminal investigation. Somewhere out there, she was missing, and time was running out. Michael King had no prior connection to Denise Amber Lee. On the afternoon of January 17, 2008, he was driving his dark green Camaro through her neighborhood. He had visited a cousin earlier that day, borrowing a shovel and duct tape. He also asked about borrowing a gas can, an unusual request that raised suspicions in hindsight. King's behavior that afternoon, including his directionless driving and unusual stops, suggested premeditation. At approximately 2 p.m., King entered the Lee home through an unlocked sliding glass door. Denise had just bathed her sons and was settling them down. The open windows masked any struggle. What happened inside remains partially unknown, but it is believed that King forced Denise into his vehicle at gunpoint. He left her children behind, alone and unattended. King drove north, passing through Venice and eventually into Charlotte County. Along the way, he made stops, some of them alarming. At one point, he visited his cousin again, this time with Denise in the back seat, partially hidden under a blanket. The cousin later testified that he heard a female voice and saw King behaving nervously. Denise remained composed during her ordeal. At some point during the drive, she managed to access King's cell phone. She dialed 911 and whispered a plea for help. The call, lasting over 6 minutes, was chilling. Denise identified her location as best she could. The dispatcher tried to keep her on the line, but the connection eventually dropped. That 911 call was routed through a neighboring county and, due to technical limitations, it did not trigger an immediate and coordinated response. Law enforcement struggled to triangulate her position. Meanwhile, King continued driving. Witnesses later reported seeing his car driving erratically. One woman, Jane Kowalski, called 911 after seeing what appeared to be a struggle in the back seat of a green Camaro near a highway off-ramp. Despite multiple alerts and tips, authorities were unable to locate King or Denise in time. The abduction was brief but devastating in scope. Denise, calm and strategic, used every opportunity to communicate, but systemic shortcomings hindered the response. Denise Amber Lee's whispered 911 call at approximately 6:14 p.m. was one of 5 separate emergency calls made in connection to her abduction. Each offered a fragment of the unfolding tragedy, yet none succeeded in bringing help swiftly enough to save her. Her own call was routed through Charlotte County's system. She gave clear indications of distress, naming locations and pleading quietly. The dispatcher asked her to repeat details, working to trace the call. Due to jurisdictional limitations and technological gaps in the 911 infrastructure, the call's origin was not immediately pinned down. The system failed to link Denise's emergency to the developing investigation already underway in nearby Northport. Another call came from Michael King's cousin, who reported King's suspicious behavior and his inquiries about gas, a shovel, and duct tape. Although unsettling, the cousin had not seen enough to connect King to Denise's disappearance. He only called after seeing news reports and realizing the potential link. The most critical call came from Jane Kowalski, a witness driving near Toledo Blade Boulevard. She reported seeing a green Camaro parked at a traffic light. From inside, she heard a woman screaming and banging on the rear window. The sight disturbed her enough to dial 911. Her call was received by a different county dispatch center and relayed without clear urgency. The description was accurate and matched King's car. Yet, miscommunication and siloed information prevented dispatchers from connecting it to the active case. Another neighbor had also contacted authorities earlier, mentioning an unfamiliar green car and a suspicious man in the area. This call was logged but not immediately linked to the larger case. The fragmented nature of these calls exposed a systemic weakness in inter-county communication. Each dispatcher operated within a limited scope, and without a unified database or real-time collaboration tools. The calls were handled in isolation. Denise had managed to make contact. Witnesses had acted responsibly, but without coordination, the pieces remained unassembled. By the time investigators began to cross-reference these calls, Denise was no longer reachable. Each missed connection would later serve as a painful reminder of what might have been prevented. As news of Denise Amber Lee's abduction spread, law enforcement from multiple jurisdictions mobilized. The Northport Police Department, Charlotte County Sheriff's Office, and Florida Department of Law Enforcement began coordinating efforts. Officers conducted door-to-door searches, distributed flyers, and retraced Michael King's known movements. Despite Denise's 911 call and several witness tips, crucial information was delayed or improperly routed. Investigators began piecing together King's activities. Surveillance footage showed his green Camaro at various gas stations. Receipts found in his vehicle later helped establish a timeline. A gas station clerk recalled seeing King with a disheveled woman in the passenger seat. The woman appeared frightened but said nothing. The clerk, unaware of the ongoing abduction, did not call police. Meanwhile, officers interviewed King's relatives. His cousin's testimony raised alarms. He described King asking to borrow tools and acting nervously. The cousin also mentioned seeing a person in the car under a blanket and hearing a female voice. These details, combined with Jane Kowalski's 911 call, heightened suspicions. Late that evening, King returned to his home in Northport. Officers tracking his movements closed in. When King tried to flee in his vehicle, They apprehended him near his residence. He was alone. Denise was not with him. Inside the car, police found strands of long brown hair, a green blanket, and evidence suggesting a struggle. A shovel and duct tape were recovered from his trunk. Under interrogation, King remained silent. He did not provide information on Denise's whereabouts. The lack of cooperation forced officers to rely on physical evidence and witness accounts. By the following morning, search teams expanded their efforts to rural areas. Helicopters scanned fields and canals. Volunteers joined in. Around 4 p.m. on January 19th, Denise's body was found buried in a shallow grave near Toledo Blade Boulevard, not far from where Jane Kowalski had reported the green Camaro. The discovery confirmed the worst fears. Denise had died from a gunshot wound to the head. Her hands were tied, and she had been sexually assaulted. The recovery site matched the trajectory described in multiple witness reports. The investigation shifted from rescue to criminal prosecution. Michael King was apprehended late in the evening on January 17, 2008, just hours after Denise Amber Lee's disappearance was reported. Acting on tips and surveillance, law enforcement officers surrounded his home in Northport. As King attempted to leave in his green Camaro, officers blocked his path and placed him under arrest without resistance. At that moment, Denise was still missing, and officers hoped she might still be alive. Inside the vehicle, investigators found crucial evidence: a blonde hair strand consistent with Denise's, a green blanket, duct tape, and a shovel, items that corroborated witness reports and King's suspicious activity. Forensics later revealed traces of Denise's DNA in the car. King was taken into custody and booked at the Charlotte County Jail. Under questioning, King invoked his right to remain silent. He offered no explanation, showed no visible emotion, and refused to provide information on Denise's location. His silence hampered the search efforts, intensifying public scrutiny and pressure on authorities to find answers. On January 19th, Denise's body was discovered in a remote wooded area off Toledo Blade Boulevard. Evidence at the scene, including disturbed soil and a bullet casing, directly linked King to the crime. The proximity to the location described in Jane Kowalski's 911 call added weight to her earlier observations. Medical examiners confirmed that Denise had been sexually assaulted and died from a single gunshot wound to the head. With Denise's death confirmed, King was formally charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual battery. The charges were elevated due to the aggravated nature of the crimes and the premeditated elements evident in the case. Prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty. The arrest sent shockwaves through the Northport community. King had no prior criminal record and lived less than 10 miles from the Lee family. His sudden transformation from neighbor to accused murderer confounded those who knew him. Authorities continue to investigate King's background, searching for signs of previous offenses or psychological instability. His behavior in custody, silent, reserved, and unemotional, did little to clarify his motives. The focus shifted to building an airtight case for trial. Michael King's trial began in August 2009 in Sarasota County Circuit Court. It drew significant public and media attention, fueled by the emotionally charged nature of the case and the widespread support for the Lee family. Prosecutors, led by Assistant State Attorney Jim Slater, argued for the death penalty, citing the brutality, premeditation, and callousness of the crime. Jury selection took days. The court worked carefully to screen candidates for bias due to the case's visibility. When opening statements began, the prosecution laid out a meticulous timeline of King's actions, relying heavily on forensic evidence, witness testimony, and the 911 recordings. Key testimony came from King's cousin, who described King's request for tools and the disturbing presence of a hidden female voice in the car. Jane Kowalski also testified, recounting what she saw and heard from her car near Toledo Blade Boulevard. Her description of the screaming woman in the Camaro was consistent with the timeline of Denise's final hours. The 911 recording of Denise's call was played in court. The jury listened in silence as her voice, calm but urgent, pleaded for help. The call's contents provided chilling insight into her awareness of the danger and her courage in the face of it. The defense, led by attorney Carolyn Schlemmer, did not deny King's involvement, but argued against the death penalty. They emphasized his lack of criminal history and alluded to potential mental health issues. However, no formal insanity defense was presented. Forensic experts detailed the physical evidence recovered from King's car and the burial site. DNA results confirmed Denise's presence in the vehicle. Autopsy results confirmed the cause of death and the timeline of her disappearance. After 2 weeks of testimony and deliberations, the jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict on all counts. The weight of the evidence, particularly the 911 call and the physical findings, left little room for doubt. The sentencing phase would determine whether King would receive life in prison or the death penalty. The courtroom was heavy with emotion as Denise's family spoke during the victim impact statements. Nathan Lee described the enduring trauma and pain of losing his wife. Rick Goff spoke as a father and as a law enforcement officer, criticizing systemic failures that contributed to the tragedy. Following Michael King's conviction, the court entered the penalty phase to determine his sentence. Prosecutors presented aggravating factors, emphasizing the calculated and violent nature of Denise Amber Lee's murder. They highlighted King's actions, abduction, sexual assault, and execution, and argued that these justified the death penalty. The defense, while conceding the brutality of the crime, urged the jury to consider mitigating circumstances. King's lack of a prior criminal record, his troubled family history, and possible mental health issues were brought forward in an effort to spare his life. Mental health experts were not called to testify extensively, limiting the defense's argument. King remained emotionless throughout the proceedings, offering no statement on his own behalf. On August 28, 2009, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty. The presiding judge, Lee Haworth, formally sentenced Michael King to death for the murder of Denise Amber Lee. He also imposed consecutive life sentences for the charges of kidnapping and sexual battery. The courtroom, packed with supporters of the Lee family, erupted in quiet relief. Nathan Lee later stated that while the sentence could not bring Denise back, it brought a measure of justice. King was transferred to Florida's death row at Union Correctional Institution. By law, all death penalty cases in Florida undergo automatic review. King's legal team filed appeals citing ineffective assistance of counsel and procedural issues during trial. They questioned jury instructions and raised concerns over the admissibility of certain evidence. The Florida Supreme Court upheld King's conviction and sentence in 2013, rejecting arguments that errors had affected the outcome. In later years, King filed additional motions for post-conviction relief, including a federal habeas corpus petition. These too were denied. The appeals process, though largely procedural, kept the case in public memory. For Denise's family, each hearing reopened wounds. Nathan Lee continued to attend court proceedings and advocate for reform. He expressed frustration over the prolonged legal battle, but remained committed to seeing the sentence upheld. Years after the sentencing, King remains on death row, having exhausted most avenues of appeal. The justice system had responded with a definitive sentence, but the emotional toll on the victims' families persisted long after the legal process concluded. The murder of Denise Amber Lee exposed critical failures in the 911 emergency response system. Despite her desperate call and multiple citizen reports, systemic flaws prevented law enforcement from locating her in time. Investigations into the timeline revealed that Denise's own 911 call had been routed to the wrong county dispatch center because of jurisdictional boundaries and communication gaps. The response was delayed and fragmented. One of the most alarming failures centered on Jane Kowalski's call. She described in real time what appeared to be a woman struggling in a green Camaro. Her detailed observations were never relayed with the urgency required, nor were they cross-referenced with the ongoing abduction alert. Dispatchers were unaware of Denise's active missing person status, as inter-county systems lacked integration. Another issue was that Kowalski's call was routed through Charlotte County, while the primary investigation was being handled in Northport and Sarasota County. Without a centralized alert system or shared database, dispatchers handled calls as isolated incidents. This disjointed approach resulted in crucial delays. The case drew sharp criticism from law enforcement experts and the public. If the calls had been coordinated, officers might have intercepted King's vehicle before he reached the burial site. Denise's calm, strategic 911 call showed she believed help was on the way. But technology and protocol failed her. Further analysis revealed broader issues. At the time, Florida lacked standardized training for 911 operators. Each county managed its own protocols, often with outdated systems and insufficient interconnectivity. Dispatchers had no tools to assess the total picture unfolding across jurisdictional lines. Denise's father, Rick Goff, was vocal about the failures. As a veteran officer, he understood the limitations of the system, but was devastated by how those limitations had cost his daughter her life. He joined efforts to push for statewide reform, insisting that no family should endure such preventable tragedy. The case became a rallying cry. Lawmakers, emergency response professionals, and citizen advocates began re-evaluating the structure of Florida's emergency response infrastructure. It was clear. Denise had done everything right. The system had not. In the aftermath of Denise's death, her husband Nathan Lee channeled his grief into advocacy. Determined to honor her memory and prevent similar tragedies, he established the Denise Amber Lee Foundation in 2008. The foundation's mission was clear: to improve emergency response systems nationwide and ensure 911 operators receive consistent, high-quality training. Nathan quickly became a prominent voice for reform. He traveled across Florida and later the country, speaking to lawmakers, emergency personnel, and the public. He shared the story of Denise's bravery, how she had managed to dial 911 under unimaginable circumstances, and how systemic failure allowed her voice to go unheard. His message resonated with dispatchers and legislators alike. The foundation emphasized the critical role of public safety telecommunicators, advocating for their recognition as first responders. Nathan argued that these professionals were just as essential as police, fire, and EMS in protecting lives. He pushed for mandatory training standards and better communication infrastructure to bridge jurisdictional gaps. One of the Foundation's major initiatives was to provide training workshops and certification programs for 911 operators. These programs included case studies, simulations, and updated best practices. The foundation also developed educational materials for law enforcement agencies and emergency response centers. Beyond training, the organization fostered partnerships with other advocacy groups and state associations. It worked to influence legislation, support research on emergency communications, and promote public awareness campaigns. Its website became a resource hub, offering tools for professionals and concerned citizens alike. The foundation's work soon expanded beyond Florida. Nathan testified before Congress and state legislatures, calling for federal support for 911 infrastructure modernization. His advocacy contributed to a broader national conversation about emergency communications reform. Through all of this, Nathan remained grounded in his personal mission. The foundation bore Denise's name, but it stood for all victims whose voices were not heard. It became a lasting legacy, turning tragedy into action and ensuring that Denise Amber Lee's story would lead to meaningful, life-saving change. The tragic death of Denise Amber Lee catalyzed legislative efforts in Florida and beyond. Lawmakers, confronted with the systemic failings exposed by the case, sought to establish safeguards that would prevent similar lapses in emergency response. Central to this movement was the passage of the Denise Amber Lee Act. In 2010, the Florida legislature unanimously approved the act. The law mandated standardized training and certification for all 911 dispatchers in the state. It created a uniform curriculum and set minimum training hours, addressing the inconsistencies that had previously plagued Florida's emergency response system. Dispatchers were now required to pass a state-approved exam, ensuring a baseline level of competency. The Act also established continuing education requirements. It recognized that technology, protocols, and public safety challenges evolve. By enforcing ongoing training, the law aimed to keep dispatchers current and capable of responding effectively across county and state lines. The legislation received strong bipartisan support. Lawmakers acknowledged the urgent need for reform and credited the Denise Amber Lee Foundation's tireless advocacy for galvanizing public and political will. Nathan Lee's testimony before committees and his clear articulation of the failures that led to Denise's death proved instrumental. Beyond Florida, the law served as a model for other states. Several legislatures began reviewing their own 911 systems, inspired by the Florida framework. Some adopted similar training standards, while others explored technology upgrades to enhance interoperability between dispatch centers. The Act also elevated the status of dispatchers, recognizing them as vital links in the public safety chain. It underscored their need for professional recognition and resources, both of which had been lacking. In later years, additional proposals emerged to reclassify dispatchers nationwide as first responders, an effort that drew momentum from the Denise Amber Lee case. While the act could not undo the tragedy, it marked a significant shift in public policy. It translated lessons learned into actionable reform and honored Denise's legacy with systemic improvements. It was a clear message. Failure to listen once would never be acceptable again. Years after Denise Amber Lee's death, the movement for emergency response reform continued. The Denise Amber Lee Foundation remained active, expanding its reach and deepening its impact. Nathan Lee, still at the forefront, dedicated his life to advocacy. He spoke at national conferences, trained dispatchers, and worked with legislators to improve public safety protocols. The Foundation's training programs grew in scope and attendance. Thousands of 911 operators from across the United States attended seminars focused on real-life case analysis, including Denise's. These sessions emphasized situational awareness, caller engagement, and the importance of interagency communication. The case remained a cornerstone example of how fragmented systems can fail even when all the right calls are made. Nathan also championed efforts to have 911 telecommunicators reclassified as first responders at the federal level. This change would grant them access to better benefits, training opportunities, and funding. Though progress was slow, support was growing. States like California and Texas considered their own versions of reclassification bills, with the foundation often consulted for guidance. Public engagement also remained a priority. The foundation launched awareness campaigns aimed at educating citizens on how to effectively use 911. Emphasis was placed on remaining calm, giving clear location information, and understanding the dispatcher's role. These efforts helped bridge the gap between the public and emergency services, fostering trust and understanding. Technological modernization was another area of focus. The foundation advocated for the adoption of next-generation 911 systems, which allow for text, video, and image transmission. This advancement would help avoid delays like those seen in Denise's case. The push for integrated digital emergency infrastructure became a key aspect of the Foundation's mission. Nathan Lee remarried and continued raising his sons, Noah and Adam, instilling in them the strength and resilience that defined their mother. His public work remained deeply personal, fueled by loss but driven by purpose. Denise's story was no longer just a tragedy. It was a catalyst for national change. Each year, the Foundation hosts a memorial event honoring Denise. It serves as a reminder of the lives that can be saved when a system works, and of the one life that ensured it never fails again. Caitlin Arquette was an 18-year-old recent graduate of Highland High School in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Born into a family of accomplished individuals, she was the youngest daughter of Lois Duncan, a well-known author, and Don Arquette, a photographer. Bright and ambitious, Caitlin stood out not only for her academic achievements, but also for her warm personality and broad circle of friends. She had been accepted to the University of New Mexico, where she planned to study biology as a precursor to a medical career. Caitlin hoped to become a doctor, a goal she pursued with characteristic determination. In preparation for college, she took summer classes and worked at a local Pier 1 import store. Her life appeared to be on a clear upward path, filled with promise and potential. Outside of her academic pursuits, Caitlin had recently become more independent. She had moved into an apartment with her boyfriend Dung Ngoc Nguyen, a 26-year-old Vietnamese immigrant. Her family believed she was renting the apartment with a female roommate, unaware at first of her true living situation. Caitlin was known for her strong moral compass and devotion to her friends and family. Despite the recent move toward independence, she remained in regular contact with her parents and siblings. Her future seemed carefully planned and grounded in a clear set of goals, making the events of July 1989 all the more tragic and incomprehensible. Caitlin's circle of friends and co-workers knew her as outgoing, cheerful, and dependable. Her sense of responsibility was matched by a growing awareness of the complexities of adulthood. The transition from high school to college is often a time of exploration and challenge. For Caitlin, it was also a time of private turmoil that would soon come to light. Her last summer alive was filled with both anticipation and unease. Caitlin had begun to express concerns about her relationship with Dung. She had confided in friends that she was having second thoughts and planned to break up with him. It was a decision she hadn't yet acted upon, but the resolve was clear. Caitlin Arquette was preparing for change. Caitlin Arquette met Dung Ngoc Nguyen in late 1988. Dung was a 26-year-old Vietnamese immigrant who had fled his country after the war and settled in California before moving to Albuquerque. Their relationship developed quickly, and by the spring of 1989, Caitlin had moved in with him. Caitlin's family, initially unaware of his full background, believed she was sharing her apartment with a female roommate. Caitlin presented Dung as being closer to her age than he actually was. When her parents eventually learned of the 8-year age difference, they became concerned. Dung had dropped out of college and held a series of jobs with limited stability. His behavior began to raise questions. Although polite and quiet, he seemed secretive and evasive during conversations. Caitlin's mother later recalled a sense of unease around him, though at the time it was hard to articulate. Over time, Caitlin began confiding in friends that the relationship wasn't what she had hoped. She mentioned frequent arguments and growing doubts about their future together. She described Dung as controlling and said she often felt watched or monitored. Despite this, she hesitated to break off the relationship abruptly, possibly fearing how Dung would react. By July 1989, Caitlin had made the decision to leave Dung. She told friends and coworkers she was preparing to end the relationship and move out. She appeared relieved at the thought of starting a new chapter in her life. Her plans were quiet, but deliberate. She hadn't shared the details with her family yet, choosing instead to speak with close friends. Caitlin also hinted that she had uncovered information about Dung that disturbed her, details she never fully explained. Dung, meanwhile, seemed unaware that Caitlin was preparing to leave. He continued to act as though their relationship was stable, even as Caitlin withdrew emotionally. The couple still lived together, but the dynamic had shifted. Caitlin began spending more time outside the apartment and was reportedly avoiding serious conversations. The relationship's decline set the stage for the events that followed. In the days before her death, Caitlin had taken steps to reclaim her independence. She had secured her enrollment at the University of New Mexico and was continuing her work schedule. The separation from Dung appeared imminent. What Caitlin knew or suspected about Dung's background remains a critical but elusive element of the story. Her decision to end the relationship and the secrecy surrounding her plans would soon gain new significance. On the evening of July 16, 1989, Caitlin Arquette visited her friend Sharon Smith in Albuquerque. They spent several hours talking, during which Caitlin appeared relaxed but somewhat distracted. According to Sharon, Caitlin seemed preoccupied and mentioned she had something important to discuss with her parents the next day. Caitlin left around 10:45 p.m., intending to return to her apartment. About 5 minutes later, near the intersection of Broadway NE and Lomas Boulevard, Caitlin's red Ford Tempo was struck by 2 bullets. One bullet entered the left side of her head. Her car swerved, veered across the road, and collided with a light pole. Emergency responders were called to the scene by a witness who had seen the crash and reported what looked like a single-car accident. When paramedics arrived, they initially thought Caitlin had suffered injuries from the crash alone. It wasn't until she was transported to the University of New Mexico Hospital that medical personnel discovered the bullet wound. Despite efforts to save her, Caitlin was pronounced dead the following day, July 17th, at 12:36 p.m. There were no immediate witnesses to the shooting itself. The area was dark and traffic was light in that hour. Police quickly ruled out robbery. Caitlin's purse was still in the car, untouched. No weapon was recovered from the scene. Shell casings found nearby were from a small caliber handgun, but they offered few clues. Her car showed no signs of forced entry or struggle. Friends and family were shocked. The idea that Caitlin had been deliberately targeted was difficult to process. She had no known enemies, and her life, though marked by a turbulent relationship, seemed otherwise stable. The randomness of the location and lack of obvious motive puzzled investigators. The case was initially treated as a homicide, but leads were limited. No one had seen the shooter. Caitlin had no time to call for help, and no surveillance cameras covered the intersection. Police interviewed neighbors and passers-by, but nothing concrete emerged. The investigation stalled early, and as hours turned to days, the question remained: who would have wanted Caitlin dead? The timeline raised further questions. Caitlin left Sharon's house at 10:45 p.m., and the shooting occurred shortly after. The short window between her departure and the attack suggested she had been followed or ambushed. Police began reviewing her recent activities and relationships, hoping to find a motive. At the top of the list was her boyfriend, Dung Nguyen. Within hours of the shooting, Caitlin's parents were contacted. Lois Duncan and Don Arquette rushed to the University of New Mexico Hospital, where they were told their daughter had been shot in the head. Doctors offered little hope. She had been unconscious since her arrival and was placed on life support. Despite medical efforts, Caitlin succumbed to her injuries at 12:36 p.m. on July 17, 1989. News of her death devastated her family and community. Friends and coworkers gathered at the hospital in disbelief. The loss of a young woman with such potential sent shockwaves through Highland High School and the wider Albuquerque area. Vigils were held, and local media began covering the story. It was initially reported as a possible random drive-by shooting. Investigators from the Albuquerque Police Department began reconstructing the final hours of Caitlin's life. They collected physical evidence from the crash site and canvassed the area for witnesses. A small caliber handgun was determined to be the weapon used based on the bullets and shell casings recovered near the scene. No fingerprints or usable forensic material were found in her car. The investigation quickly focused on Caitlin's personal life. Detectives visited her apartment and interviewed those close to her. Dung Nguyen was brought in for questioning. He claimed he had been home at the time of the shooting, unaware that Caitlin had been attacked until notified by police. Officers noted that he appeared visibly shaken. A note was discovered at their apartment, written in Caitlin's handwriting. It appeared to express regret over the relationship, hinting that she planned to end it. Investigators considered whether the shooting might be linked to a domestic dispute, but Dung denied any involvement. He said their relationship had recently been strained, but insisted he had not harmed her. Lois Duncan began her own inquiry within days. Frustrated by what she saw as a lack of urgency in the police response, she kept meticulous records of conversations and events. She believed Caitlin's death was not random, and that her daughter had uncovered something dangerous. Duncan's instincts pushed her to dig deeper, as official channels yielded few answers. Meanwhile, police circulated appeals for information and followed up on tips. None led to a breakthrough. Caitlin's funeral was held days later, drawing a large turnout from family, friends, and members of the public. She was remembered for her warmth, intelligence, and the future she never got to live. The investigation remained open, but momentum quickly faded. In the days following Caitlin's death, Dung Nguyen's actions drew increasing scrutiny. He told investigators he had spent the evening at home and had last seen Caitlin earlier in the day. According to his statement, she had gone to visit a friend and was expected to return later that night. He claimed he went to bed shortly before she was due back and was awakened by police informing him of the shooting. Police found no immediate evidence to contradict his account. He provided details about his whereabouts and cooperated during initial questioning. However, detectives noted inconsistencies in his tone and behavior. He seemed shaken but evasive. When asked about the state of their relationship, Dung admitted they had experienced tension, but insisted it was not serious. He denied any knowledge of threats against Caitlin or involvement in criminal activity. A note in Caitlin's handwriting, found at their apartment, raised further questions. It read as a farewell or final message, expressing emotional distance and the need to move on. Investigators debated whether it suggested an amicable separation or something more ominous. Forensic analysis confirmed Caitlin had written it, but the timing of the note remained unclear. It could have been written days before her death, or hours. 5 days after Caitlin died, Dung attempted suicide. He was found unconscious in his apartment after an apparent overdose. He survived and was hospitalized under observation. When questioned later, Dung stated that he had been overcome with guilt and grief. He reiterated that he had nothing to do with the shooting, but said he felt responsible for Caitlin's unhappiness. His suicide attempt only intensified suspicions about his role. Friends of Caitlin came forward with accounts of her discomfort in the relationship. Some said she had feared Dung would retaliate if she left him. Others recalled her saying she had found out things about him that scared her. One friend reported Caitlin believed Dung had ties to people engaged in illegal activity. None of these claims could be substantiated, but they deepened the mystery surrounding his background. Still, police did not have enough evidence to charge him. Without a weapon, witness, or forensic tie to the scene, the investigation stalled. Dung was not arrested, nor publicly named as a suspect. He remained in Albuquerque for a time before eventually relocating. His connection to Caitlin and the unanswered questions about his conduct continued to shadow the case. Despite outward cooperation, Dung declined further interviews. His silence added to the uncertainty. Caitlin's parents were left to wonder if the truth about her death lay buried in his past. As official efforts slowed, Lois Duncan took a more active role in uncovering what she believed was a concealed history and a hidden motive. In the weeks after Caitlin Arquette's murder, the Albuquerque Police Department pursued multiple leads. Detectives interviewed friends, co-workers, and neighbors. They examined her personal life and movements in the days leading up to July 16th. Despite these efforts, no suspects were identified. The case was eventually labeled a random act of violence, a conclusion that frustrated her family. The lack of evidence shaped the department's stance. No one witnessed the shooting, and the bullets retrieved from Caitlin's head and the scene came from a small caliber firearm that was never found. Her car contained no fingerprints other than her own. Surveillance systems were limited in 1989, and the area where the attack occurred offered no visual records. Despite canvassing the neighborhood, police found no one who had seen a shooter or a second vehicle near the intersection. Public statements from investigators indicated they had no clear motive or suspect. They dismissed robbery as Caitlin's valuables were untouched. They saw no sign of forced entry or struggle, and the timing of her drive suggested she hadn't planned to meet anyone. Her social life, work, and academic plans appeared normal. No threats or warnings had been documented in the weeks before her death. Family and friends were not convinced. To them, Caitlin's decision to end her relationship with Dung Nguyen and the secrecy surrounding her personal movements suggested a targeted killing. Her mother, Lois Duncan, voiced concern that the police had closed investigative paths too soon. She believed Caitlin had uncovered something dangerous, something that had cost her life. Lois began writing detailed accounts of her own interactions with police. She noted their reluctance to pursue certain leads and their tendency to downplay tips that didn't align with the random shooting theory. When she requested updates or proposed alternate theories, she often received vague or dismissive responses. The case, in her view, had become static. In interviews, police maintained they had followed every available lead. They acknowledged the possibility of undiscovered factors but defended their work. Still, no arrests were made, and no persons of interest were publicly named. The Arquette family's appeals for more aggressive action went unheeded. Eventually, the department declared the case cold. Caitlin's name joined a list of unsolved homicides in New Mexico. Over time, official efforts slowed. The investigation into her death became dormant, with only occasional file reviews or response to new tips. For Lois Duncan, this was unacceptable. She believed that Caitlin's murder had been carefully planned, and that the failure to solve it was due not to a lack of evidence, but a lack of will. In the absence of law enforcement progress, she decided to act on her own. Frustrated by the stalled official inquiry, Lois Duncan launched her own investigation into her daughter's death. Drawing on her skills as a writer and researcher, she began piecing together Caitlin's final days and the possible motives for her murder. Lois conducted interviews, tracked leads, and followed connections that law enforcement had either overlooked or dismissed. She began by talking to Caitlin's friends and coworkers, learning that her daughter had recently expressed fears about something she had discovered. Caitlin had mentioned concerns about her boyfriend, Dung Nguyen, and hinted that he was involved in illegal activity. These conversations took on new urgency after her death, painting a picture of a young woman on the verge of exposing something dangerous. Lois discovered that Caitlin and Dung had been involved in a staged car accident just weeks before the murder. Police records showed that Caitlin had driven a car that was deliberately crashed in an apparent insurance scam. The other driver, a man named Robert Garcia, was later connected to Dung. Lois believed Caitlin had agreed to participate, but then regretted the decision and wanted out. Her research led her to Southern California, where she uncovered possible ties between Dung and members of a Vietnamese crime syndicate. She spoke with a private investigator who had experience tracking organized crime networks and learned that similar staged accidents were used to defraud insurance companies. Duncan began to suspect that Caitlin had learned too much about the scheme and had become a liability. Lois also examined the phone records from Caitlin's apartment. On the night of the murder and the following day, calls had been placed to a paralegal in California with known connections to fraudulent accident claims. Lois found this suspicious. Caitlin was dead, but someone in her apartment was making calls to individuals tied to the scam. The deeper she dug, the more convinced Lois became that her daughter's death was not random. She compiled a dossier of evidence, including interviews, documents, and timelines. She even published a book, Who Killed My Daughter, detailing her findings and outlining her theory that Caitlin had been silenced to protect a criminal operation. Despite her efforts, law enforcement did not reopen the case. Some officers privately expressed sympathy, but officially, the position remained unchanged. Duncan's work, however, kept public attention on the case. She appeared in media interviews, worked with advocacy groups, and continued to search for answers long after the trail had gone cold. Her independent investigation kept Caitlin's name alive in the public eye. Though it yielded no arrests at the time, it preserved critical information and helped shape the understanding of what may have truly happened. For Lois, it was both a pursuit of justice and a way to preserve her daughter's voice. As Lois Duncan expanded her inquiry, inconsistencies in Dung Nguyen's behavior and Caitlin's final days raised troubling questions. Dung had maintained that he was unaware of Caitlin's whereabouts the night of the shooting. Yet, phone records showed multiple calls from their apartment to contacts involved in known insurance scams shortly after Caitlin's death. Some calls were placed within hours of the shooting, which contradicted Dung's claim of being asleep and uninformed. Lois found the timing suspicious. Caitlin had just returned from visiting a friend and was driving home when she was attacked. If someone had followed her, it suggested premeditation. The brief window between her departure and the shooting implied the killer knew her route and schedule. Lois believed Dung or someone close to him may have had that knowledge. Friends reported that Caitlin had been anxious in the days before her death. She had told one friend she was afraid to go home and had begun sleeping with a knife nearby. Another friend claimed Caitlin said she had found out something bad but hadn't elaborated. Lois documented these remarks in detail, noting that Caitlin's demeanor had changed from relaxed to wary in her final week. The contents of the note found in Caitlin's apartment added another layer of ambiguity. Though written in her hand, the tone suggested a final break from someone. Police saw it as a possible suicide note, but Lois believed it was a statement of independence, her way of cutting ties. The note's presence did not explain the shooting, nor did it provide insight into who would want her dead. Dung's suicide attempt was also re-examined. He had taken an overdose days after Caitlin's funeral. He survived and later claimed it was due to grief. However, Lois questioned whether it was driven by remorse, guilt, or fear of exposure. The timing of the act so soon after the murder appeared significant, especially given his earlier statements of being uninvolved. One of the more disturbing discoveries came from an informant who contacted Lois anonymously. This person alleged that Caitlin had been targeted by individuals involved in a fraudulent car insurance ring. They claimed she had threatened to go to authorities and had been warned to stay silent. The tip was never verified, but it aligned with Caitlin's reported anxiety and the nature of the scam she had briefly joined. Despite these findings, no charges were brought. Police declined to reclassify the case or re-interview witnesses. Without concrete evidence, the Arquette family was left in a state of limbo, haunted by credible suspicions but denied official acknowledgement. The unanswered questions multiplied. Why was Caitlin followed? Who knew her schedule that night? What did she plan to tell her parents the next day? Each clue pointed toward a broader conspiracy, but the full picture remained just out of reach. For over 3 decades, Caitlin Arquette's case remained cold. Then, in July 2021, a break came unexpectedly. Paul Apodaca, a 53-year-old Albuquerque man, walked into a police substation and confessed to the 1989 murder of Caitlin Arquette. He also admitted responsibility for 2 other homicides, the 1988 stabbing of Althea Oakley and the 1986 fatal assault of Stella Gonzalez. All 3 cases had been unsolved. Apodaca's confession came during a conversation with detectives about other incidents. He stated that he had been present at the scene of Caitlin's shooting and had fired the fatal shot. He claimed he acted alone and did not know Caitlin personally. Apodaca did not give a clear motive, saying only that he had done bad things and wanted to come clean. His reasons for confessing after so many years were unclear, but investigators noted his apparent sincerity. At the time of Caitlin's murder, Apodaca was a 17-year-old with a long history of criminal behavior. Records showed arrests for weapons possession, assault, and trespassing. He had been known to police in the late 1980s, but had never been linked to Caitlin's case. Following his confession, detectives reopened files and re-examined evidence. They found that Apodaca had not been interviewed during the original investigation. The confession triggered renewed media attention and public interest. Questions emerged about how Apodaca had avoided suspicion for so long, especially given his documented proximity to violent crimes in the area. Some noted that he had worked near the location of the shooting and had access to weapons. His background aligned with the profile of someone capable of random violence, but he had remained invisible to law enforcement for decades. Further investigation revealed that Apodaca had made incriminating statements in years past, but had never been taken seriously. Former acquaintances recalled troubling behavior and alleged that he had hinted at involvement in unsolved crimes. These anecdotes, though anecdotal, supported his claim of long-term guilt. Law enforcement officials took the confessions seriously. Apodaca was arrested and charged with the murders of Caitlin Arquette, Althea Oakley, and Stella Gonzalez. Prosecutors announced that they would seek justice for the victims and their families. While some aspects of the confession lacked corroborating physical evidence, the consistency of Apodaca's statements and the detail he provided convinced authorities of their validity. For Lois Duncan, who had passed away in 2016, the confession came too late. But for her family and supporters, it marked the first time an individual had claimed direct responsibility for Caitlin's death. It challenged earlier theories about organized crime and domestic motives, suggesting instead a brutal act committed by a lone predator. Still, questions remained about whether Apodaca had acted entirely alone. Following Paul Apodaca's confession in July 2021, formal charges were brought against him in connection with Caitlin Arquette's murder. In February 2022, a grand jury indicted Apodaca on one count of first-degree murder based on his voluntary admission and supporting investigative findings. Prosecutors moved forward cautiously, aware that much of the case hinged on a decades-old crime with limited physical evidence. Apodaca entered a plea of not guilty at his initial court appearance, but later changed it as part of a plea agreement. In January 2024, he pled guilty to the murder of Caitlin Arquette, as well as to two other homicides, those of Althea Oakley and Stella Gonzalez. The court proceedings included a detailed account of his crimes, derived from his confessions and corroborated timelines. Investigators affirmed that Apodaca had provided specific details that were not publicly known, reinforcing the credibility of his statements. During sentencing, the court reviewed Apodaca's long history of criminal conduct, including prior arrests and behavioral issues dating back to adolescence. While not previously convicted of murder, his record painted a picture of escalating violence and mental instability. Mental health evaluations were considered, but the judge ultimately concluded that the confessions and the harm caused warranted a lengthy prison term. In a packed courtroom, Caitlin's family and supporters listened as Apodaca was sentenced to 45 years in prison. Because the murders had occurred in the late 1980s and early 1990s, sentencing laws from that era applied, limiting the maximum penalty. Still, the outcome represented a measure of justice after more than 3 decades. Statements from the victims' families highlighted the emotional toll of the crimes. Caitlin's siblings spoke of the enduring grief and the impact of living without closure for so long. They expressed gratitude to investigators who had worked on the case and to those who had supported their efforts over the years. Although Lois Duncan did not live to see the sentencing, her work was acknowledged by family and officials as instrumental in keeping the case active in public memory. Apodaca, now in his 50s, offered a brief apology in court. He said he was sorry for what he had done and that he hoped his admission would bring some peace. The judge, in his final remarks, noted the damage caused by Apodaca's actions and stated that the sentence was intended both to punish and to provide a sense of accountability for the victims' families. The conviction marked the end of one of New Mexico's most haunting unsolved cases. Though many aspects remained unexplained, particularly Apodaca's exact motive, his admission and sentencing closed a chapter that had remained open far too long. The murder of Caitlin Arquette altered the course of her family's life. Her mother, Lois Duncan, transformed from a successful author of young adult fiction into an advocate for victims of violent crime. Devastated by the loss of her daughter and dissatisfied with the official investigation, Lois redirected her energy into uncovering the truth and supporting others who had suffered similar tragedies. Lois published Who Killed My Daughter in 1992, chronicling her search for answers. The book received national attention and sparked interest in Caitlin's case. Over time, it became a foundational text for families confronting unresolved homicides. Lois used her platform to highlight investigative gaps and promote legislative reforms. She appeared on talk shows, spoke at conferences, and collaborated with journalists to keep Caitlin's name in public view. Beyond her personal inquiry, Lois co-founded the Resource Center for Victims of Violent Deaths, based in Albuquerque. The center provided support to families navigating the aftermath of homicide. It offered counseling referrals, assistance with law enforcement interactions, and public awareness campaigns. Lois remained closely involved, using her experience to guide others through the painful process of seeking justice. Caitlin's siblings were also deeply affected. Each took their own path in processing the loss, but all supported their mother's quest. Family photos, journal entries, and shared memories of Caitlin became central in preserving her presence. The Arquettes refused to let her be forgotten, organizing memorials and speaking openly about the case. As the years passed and the case remained unsolved, Lois's resolve never wavered. Even when initial leads went cold, she maintained detailed notes, followed new information, and corresponded with retired detectives, private investigators, and forensic experts. She also kept in touch with other families of homicide victims, offering comfort and advice drawn from her own painful journey. Lois Duncan passed away in 2016 at the age of 82. She did not live to see Paul Apodaca's confession or the legal resolution of her daughter's murder, but her contributions to victim advocacy and investigative awareness left a lasting legacy. Her family carried on her work, recognizing that her efforts had preserved crucial evidence and sustained public attention on Caitlin's case. The Arquette family's experience underscores the enduring impact of violent crime. Caitlin's murder was not an isolated event. It was a rupture that extended across decades. The pain remained, but so did the commitment to truth and remembrance. For her family, every step toward justice reaffirmed Caitlin's life and the values she stood for. With the conviction of Paul Apodaca in 2024, the case of Caitlin Arquette reached a legal conclusion. After 35 years, a name was finally attached to the crime that had altered so many lives. For Caitlin's family, the moment was bittersweet. It brought a sense of resolution, but it also reopened wounds that had never fully healed. The story of Caitlin's murder became emblematic of broader issues in the justice system. Cases left unresolved, evidence overlooked, and the crucial role of persistence. The Arquette family's unrelenting pursuit of answers ensured the case remained in the public eye, ultimately creating a pathway to resolution. Though Lois Duncan did not live to see the outcome, her efforts were acknowledged by police, legal officials, and victim advocacy groups. The final confirmation that Caitlin had been killed by a stranger, a man unconnected to her inner circle, challenged earlier assumptions. For years, the focus had been on personal relationships, suspected criminal entanglements, and potential targeted motives. Apodaca's confession shifted the narrative to one of random violence, prompting reflection on how investigative directions are chosen and sustained over time. Caitlin's life, though brief, left a lasting impression. Her academic promise, kindness, and plans for the future were frequently recalled in tributes. Friends and former classmates remembered her as vibrant and thoughtful. Teachers spoke of her ambition and potential. Her memory endured not just through books and interviews, but in the advocacy her family inspired. The Resource Center for Victims of Violent Deaths continued its mission, providing guidance to families facing unsolved crimes. Staff and volunteers, many of them survivors themselves, carried forward the principles Lois championed: compassion, accountability, and transparency. Caitlin's case became part of their training, a reminder of how persistence and public engagement can keep a cold case alive. For law enforcement, the case served as a retrospective lesson in the limitations of forensic technology and the value of revisiting old files. The confession by Apodaca was not prompted by new evidence, but by his own decision to come forward. Yet, the preservation of records and ongoing dialogue around the case enabled authorities to respond quickly and credibly when the opportunity arose. In the end, justice came not from a breakthrough in evidence, but from the enduring belief that Caitlin's story mattered. Her family's refusal to accept silence brought attention to failures and fueled change. Though the full truth of her final hours may never be known, her life was not defined solely by her death. The resolution of Caitlin Arquette's case underscored the enduring human cost of the unsolved violence and the strength of those left behind who demand answers. On the afternoon of February 19, 2008, 9-year-old Shannon Matthews left Westmore Junior School in Dewsbury Moor, West Yorkshire, after a school swimming trip. She was last seen around 3:10 p.m., walking back to her home on Moorside Road. According to school records and witness accounts, she was wearing a black jumper with the school logo, a white t-shirt, and gray trousers. Her mother, Karen Matthews, reported Shannon missing at 6:48 p.m. that same evening. She told the authorities that Shannon had not returned home and that this was out of character for the child. The call to police prompted immediate concern. Officers began local inquiries and canvassed the neighborhood. Karen lived in a council estate with her partner, Craig Meehan, and several of her children. Shannon was one of 7 siblings. The family's home was located in an area known for economic hardship, and the community was tightly knit. By nightfall, police officers were deployed to search the surrounding area. Neighbors joined in, scouring streets, alleyways, and fields. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging swept the terrain. Door-to-door checks commenced. Within hours, it had become a major missing child case. Detectives quickly established a timeline of Shannon's last known movements. Her teacher confirmed she had left the school with friends. Several classmates stated that Shannon was cheerful and showed no signs of distress that day. No evidence suggested she had run away or was in trouble at school or at home. Karen Matthews gave interviews early on, describing her daughter as loving, quiet, and not the sort of child to run off. She said Shannon was looking forward to a school disco the following week and had no reason to disappear voluntarily. Police treated the case as a high-risk missing person situation. By the following morning, the case had escalated to involve West Yorkshire Police's major incident team. A command post was set up. Officers began a systematic search of Dewsbury Moor and nearby areas. CCTV footage was reviewed. The media were alerted. Shannon's image began appearing on news bulletins and printed flyers. Her disappearance was being treated with increasing urgency. As the hours turned into days, concern grew. The initial 48 hours yielded no solid leads. Shannon's face appeared on national television. Interviews with Karen continued. Police made public appeals, urging anyone who had seen Shannon or had any information to come forward. Despite early efforts, no witnesses came forward with definitive information about her movements after she left school. No CCTV footage showed her route home. Police noted the lack of any digital or forensic trail. Her mobile phone, if she had one, wasn't active. The absence of evidence was stark. By the third day, the investigation expanded. More than 60 detectives were now involved. Search dogs were brought in. The police continued to insist they were treating the case as that of a missing person rather than an abduction, though they weren't ruling anything out. Posters and appeals began appearing further afield. Volunteers distributed leaflets. Public concern was growing. Police coordinated with social services and the local education authority. They interviewed school staff, classmates, and neighbors. Despite the broadening inquiry, Shannon's whereabouts remained unknown. Her name began trending across media outlets. Daily press conferences were held. The mystery of Shannon Matthews' disappearance had just begun. The search for Shannon Matthews rapidly became one of the largest in West Yorkshire Police's recent history. By the end of the first week, more than 200 officers and support staff were involved. Specialist teams from neighboring forces were brought in. Police used grid searches, thermal imaging, and sniffer dogs to comb local woodlands, parks, and buildings. A base was established at Dewsbury Sports Centre, which functioned as a coordination point. Maps, lists of volunteers, and logs of sightings were posted along its walls. Officers methodically searched more than 3,000 houses in and around the Moorside estate. The door-to-door inquiry was extensive and thorough. Local residents responded strongly. Hundreds volunteered, joining search parties, printing posters, and handing out leaflets in nearby towns. Many knew Shannon or her family. Their involvement was personal. Children from her school helped distribute flyers. Vigil walks were held nightly, and a reward fund began to build, starting with community donations. Media coverage intensified. Regional newspapers featured Shannon's photograph on their front pages. National broadcasters provided daily updates. The case drew parallels with the 2007 disappearance of Madeleine McCann. Some questioned whether the disparity in socioeconomic backgrounds between the two families affected public interest, but coverage of Shannon's case continued to grow. The search extended beyond Dewsbury. Motorways, rivers, and canals were checked. Surveillance footage from buses and businesses was analyzed. Hundreds of tips were phoned in, each documented and followed up. Officers reviewed data from sex offender registries in the area. Every possibility was considered. On February 25th, a week after Shannon's disappearance, police released a photo of her taken just before the swimming trip. It showed her smiling in a pink costume, her hair pulled back. This image was used in new appeals, which ran on national television. Karen Matthews appeared at a police press conference that same day. Flanked by detectives, she issued a tearful plea for Shannon's safe return. "Shannon, please come home. We're all missing you," she said. The public appeal had a profound impact. Viewers flooded police lines with messages and information. Yet, no verified sightings of Shannon were confirmed. Despite wide circulation of her image and detailed accounts of her last known location, the investigation remained without a breakthrough. In the days that followed, the police enlisted the help of local taxi drivers, bus companies, and railway staff. Posters were placed at every transport hub in West Yorkshire. A special hotline was maintained 24 hours a day. Officers began collecting CCTV from further afield, checking whether Shannon could have been taken by vehicle. Detectives interviewed family members and close acquaintances of the Matthews household. Statements were taken and timelines compared. Karen's partner, Craig Meehan, and other relatives cooperated with inquiries. police conducted routine checks of homes belonging to those in contact with the family. By early March, the search effort had cost over £500,000. The reward fund, supported by local businesses and the press, had reached £50,000. Despite growing scrutiny, Karen continued to appear on camera, always pleading for Shannon's return. The community began organizing fundraising events. Schools held assemblies. Local clergy offered prayers. The case had become deeply embedded in national consciousness. Still, after 2 weeks, police reported they were no closer to finding Shannon than on the day she vanished. The investigation team refused to declare the case an abduction without evidence. They reiterated that they had found no trace of foul play, but also no sign Shannon had left on her own. As March arrived, the intensity of the search remained. New theories emerged and were tested. Yet, Shannon Matthews, last seen walking home from school, had vanished without a trace. As the second week of the investigation began, public interest in the Shannon Matthews case intensified. The press amplified its coverage. Shannon's image, often the swimming pool photo released by police, appeared daily in newspapers and on television broadcasts. The Sun, Daily Mirror, and local press devoted full pages to the story, tracking developments and appealing for public assistance. Karen Matthews, often accompanied by Shannon's stepfather, Craig Meehan, gave multiple interviews. Her appearances were emotional. She spoke directly to Shannon, saying, "Mommy and everyone are missing you. Please come home." At one press conference, she held Shannon's favorite toy, a teddy bear, and broke down in tears. Cameras captured Karen wearing a t-shirt printed with Shannon's photograph. She made several TV appearances, including on GMTV. Public empathy initially ran high. Comparisons to the McCann case continued, but some observers began to scrutinize the differences, both in media tone and resource allocation. Still, coverage remained widespread and focused. A £100,000 reward was offered, with contributions from the Sun newspaper and Crime Stoppers. Police reiterated that no one was being ruled out. They publicly asked Shannon, if she was able, to call a free phone number. A new picture of her school uniform was released to encourage fresh sightings. On March 4th, the Matthews family appeared on BBC's Crime Watch. The broadcast reconstructed Shannon's last known steps. Karen appealed again, describing her daughter as shy and unlikely to go with strangers. The program prompted over 200 calls, but no conclusive leads emerged. CCTV from homes and businesses continued to be reviewed frame by frame. The case divided public opinion. Sympathy and support remained strong in Dewsbury, but online forums and some media outlets began raising questions. Discussions turned to the Matthews family background, their financial status, and social behavior. Some stories speculated, often without evidence. Police maintained a strict focus on the investigation's integrity. Public appeals grew more frequent. Posters with Shannon's face were placed in supermarkets, bus stops, and community halls. National television kept the case in headlines. Yet, despite the exposure, Shannon's location remained unknown. She had seemingly vanished without witnesses, footage, or traceable movements. Karen Matthews continued giving interviews, sometimes several in a week. On March 6th, she spoke to the Yorkshire Post, saying, "I feel like my heart has been ripped out." At each appearance, she urged for information and begged for Shannon's return. She also thanked the police and volunteers, noting the support from friends and neighbors. Meanwhile, detectives remained cautious. They issued few details publicly, careful not to compromise the investigation. West Yorkshire police stressed that all possible lines of inquiry were open. They confirmed that they were continuing house-to-house searches, checking watercourses, and examining mobile phone and internet activity linked to known contacts. Media interest began expanding beyond just the search. Reporters profiled Dewsbury Moor and discussed the estate's socio-economic conditions. This shifted some narratives away from Shannon and toward broader commentary. Still, the core message remained. Shannon Matthews, age 9, was missing, and her family wanted her home. By mid-March, more than 1,300 statements had been taken and over 1,500 premises searched. Police said they had logged more than 3,000 calls to the dedicated hotline. Despite the volume of information, no significant new lead emerged. As the investigation entered its fourth week, the media cycle began to strain. Editors debated how to keep the story prominent. The lack of developments frustrated journalists and police alike. Some questioned whether Shannon had been abducted or had simply run away. Yet officers insisted they had no evidence of either. Behind the scenes, detectives started to revisit earlier interviews. Behavioral patterns, family dynamics, and inconsistencies in statements were being re-examined. But publicly, the search and appeals continued. The image of a smiling 9-year-old girl had become familiar across Britain. But 21 days after she was last seen, Shannon Matthews had still not been found. As the investigation passed its third week, West Yorkshire Police intensified their internal review of all information gathered. With no confirmed sightings of Shannon and no forensic breakthroughs, detectives began to reanalyze interviews and timelines. A pattern of inconsistencies was beginning to emerge, particularly around the statements given by Karen Matthews and individuals close to her. Detectives had originally treated the Matthews family as cooperative. Karen gave several statements and appeared frequently in the media. Yet, as interviews continued, minor contradictions began to surface. These included inconsistencies about Karen's whereabouts on the day of Shannon's disappearance and slight changes in the description of events. Officers also noticed that some members of the household were evasive during questioning. Craig Meehan, Karen's partner, came under increased scrutiny. While he initially supported the search, investigators began examining his digital activity. On March 14th, his computer was seized and sent for forensic analysis. This was standard procedure given his proximity to the case. In parallel, detectives started to examine the wider Matthews family network. One name that came to attention was Michael Donovan, also known as Paul Drake. He was the uncle of Meehan and had a criminal history. Donovan lived in a flat in Batley Carr, just a few miles from Dewsbury Moor. His connection to the family was not immediately obvious to the wider public. As officers revisited each household in the area, they noticed reluctance from some residents to engage. Rumors circulated, and a few tip-offs suggested Shannon might not have left the estate. Detectives began to focus on the possibility that she had been hidden deliberately. This theory, once remote, started gaining weight. Karen's demeanor in interviews also began to raise questions. While her public appearances were emotional, police observed inconsistencies during taped interviews. Some statements were vague or shifted subtly over time. These anomalies were documented, but police remained cautious not to draw premature conclusions. Search operations continued. Over 1,600 locations had been checked. Investigators re-examined refuse sites, garages, and garden sheds. Every registered sex offender within 10 miles had been interviewed. Nothing pointed to an external abduction. No ransom demands were received. No clear motive had emerged. As pressure mounted, detectives began surveillance on selected individuals. Officers covertly monitored movements, hoping for a clue. The case remained classed as a high-risk missing person investigation. But internally, theories about concealment and manipulation were discussed more openly. On March 24th, police expanded searches into areas beyond Dewsbury Moor. Acting on new intelligence, they began a focused sweep of the Batley Car area. Attention turned specifically to a block of flats on Lydgate Gardens. Surveillance teams were deployed and an operational plan was drawn up. Parallel to the active search, forensic officers analyzed electronic devices seized during the investigation. Craig Meehan's computer was found to contain illegal images. While not directly linked to Shannon's disappearance, the finding added complexity. Meehan was arrested on unrelated charges and taken in for questioning. Karen was informed of the arrest, but continued to insist that her daughter had been abducted. Police interviewed her again. Her responses remained inconsistent. Officers noted a lack of emotional coherence in some of her answers. These discrepancies, combined with other evidence, reinforced suspicions that the initial version of events was not entirely truthful. The mood among investigators shifted. A senior officer remarked in a briefing that they were no longer looking solely for a missing child. We may be dealing with something more. As March neared its end, the investigation moved quietly but decisively. Surveillance, phone records, and movement tracking converged around a single location in Batley Car, a flat on the top floor of a small apartment building. Entry plans were drafted. Officers were ready to act. They were closing in on a lead that would finally break open the case. On the afternoon of March 14, 2008, 24 days after Shannon Matthews had disappeared, West Yorkshire Police executed a planned entry at a flat in Lydgate Gardens, Batley Car. Intelligence had led officers to the address, home to Michael Donovan, also known as Paul Drake, a 39-year-old man with a history of mental health issues and prior offenses. He was also the uncle of Karen Matthews' partner, Craig Meehan. At approximately 12:30 p.m., officers forced entry into the flat. The operation was swift and methodical. As they cleared the property, one of the officers heard movement coming from underneath a divan bed in a bedroom. The officer asked repeatedly for any person inside to reveal themselves. Moments later, a child's voice responded. It was Shannon. The officers removed the base of the bed and found the 9-year-old hidden inside. She was alive, but visibly frightened and confused. Alongside her, Michael Donovan was found hiding. He was immediately arrested on suspicion of abduction. Shannon was taken into police protection and transported to a secure location for medical assessment and questioning. Shannon's discovery marked a dramatic shift in the case. She had been missing for over 3 weeks. In that time, thousands of hours had been spent on the search. The news of her recovery was met with overwhelming public relief. Crowds gathered outside the police cordon. Reporters rushed to the scene. Police withheld details of Shannon's condition at first, but confirmed she was safe and well. Medical staff assessed her physical health, which was generally stable. She appeared malnourished and emotionally subdued, but unharmed. A forensic examination of the flat was conducted. Evidence, including bedding, food wrappers, and clothing, was removed for analysis. In custody, Donovan was uncooperative at first. Police initiated a formal interview process. Simultaneously, Shannon was placed under protective services. She was interviewed by specially trained officers and a child psychologist. These interviews would later become crucial to the case. Shannon recounted that she had been told to stay hidden. She had been drugged and confined, not allowed to go outside or contact anyone. Donovan allegedly warned her that she would be hurt if she tried to leave or make noise. Police found traces of sedatives in her system. Medication linked to Donovan was seized. Within 48 hours, police began connecting the dots. Shannon's account aligned with emerging forensic evidence. Interviews with Donovan revealed he had not acted alone. Under pressure, Donovan claimed that the plan had been orchestrated by Karen Matthews herself. The confession stunned investigators. Donovan alleged that Karen had devised the abduction scheme to generate media attention and access reward money. He claimed she planned to find Shannon at a staged moment, then share the reward. According to Donovan, he had been reluctant but was convinced by Karen's promises. Detectives began re-interviewing Karen. Faced with Donovan's statement and mounting evidence, her own narrative began to unravel. Surveillance logs, mobile phone records, and behavioral analyses pointed toward her involvement. On April 6, 2008, Karen Matthews was arrested on suspicion of perverting the course of justice and child neglect. News of Karen's arrest provoked a shocked public reaction. Sympathy for her turned to disbelief and anger. The community that had rallied around her felt betrayed. Posters were torn down. Volunteers expressed regret and outrage. Media outlets that had previously featured her emotional pleas now ran headlines branding her a liar. The arrest triggered further inquiries. Social services reviewed the care of Shannon and her siblings. Police worked to reconstruct the events leading to Shannon's captivity. Additional evidence from Donovan's flat supported the theory of a premeditated plan. On April 8th, both Karen Matthews and Michael Donovan were formally charged with kidnap, false imprisonment, and perverting the course of justice. The charges marked the culmination of a month-long investigation that had captivated the country and now revealed a dark and calculated deception at its heart. Following the arrest of Karen Matthews and Michael Donovan, the investigation shifted from search and rescue to criminal prosecution. Detectives now focused on reconstructing the events behind Shannon's disappearance and the motivations for the staged kidnapping. Evidence from interviews, forensic findings, and digital records began to solidify the prosecution's case. Michael Donovan, initially evasive, gradually provided further details during police interviews. He claimed that the plot had been Karen's idea, and that she had convinced him it would lead to a financial reward. According to Donovan, the plan was to keep Shannon hidden for several days and then discover her in a dramatic rescue, collecting the reward money and gaining public sympathy. Donovan described how, on the day of the disappearance, he picked Shannon up after school and took her to his flat. Investigators confirmed that his car was not equipped with child locks, meaning Shannon could have exited, unless prevented. Forensic evidence supported Shannon's claim that she had been kept sedated. Police found packets of temozepam and travel sickness tablets in Donovan's flat, believed to have been used to keep Shannon quiet and compliant. Further investigation uncovered that Karen and Donovan had exchanged multiple phone calls in the days leading up to and following the disappearance. Phone records, recovered texts, and surveillance logs showed contact between the two during critical periods. Some calls were placed late at night, raising suspicion. During questioning, Karen denied involvement, describing Donovan as unstable and manipulative. She insisted she had no role in Shannon's abduction. However, inconsistencies in her statements persisted. Police compared her televised appeals with her interviews. Analysts noted rehearsed language and an absence of genuine emotional cues. Authorities also examined Shannon's testimony. In video-recorded sessions, Shannon explained she had been told by Donovan not to make noise and that her mother would come to collect her soon. She described being kept in the dark most of the time, with only occasional access to a bathroom and brief periods out of the bed compartment. Police traced the origin of the plan to early February 2008. Karen had reportedly discussed financial pressures and commented on media attention surrounding missing children. Donovan, dependent on disability benefits and suffering from agoraphobia, appeared susceptible to persuasion. Police theorized that Karen had exploited this vulnerability to orchestrate the plan. Prosecutors prepared to charge both suspects formally. On April 8, 2008, Karen Matthews and Michael Donovan were charged with kidnap, false imprisonment, and perverting the course of justice. Bail was denied. As news spread, community anger intensified. Former supporters expressed shock. Some residents of Dewsbury Moor spoke of feeling manipulated and ashamed. Social services took immediate action. Shannon and her siblings were placed in care. Authorities conducted assessments to determine their welfare and safety. Court-imposed restrictions protected Shannon's identity and current location. Psychological evaluations indicated that Shannon had suffered emotional trauma but was beginning to recover. Public reaction was swift and severe. Newspapers ran front-page stories accusing Karen of betrayal and greed. Commentators criticized the exploitation of public goodwill and questioned how someone could stage a child's disappearance. The case prompted wider discussion about media influence, social status, and parental responsibility. Meanwhile, West Yorkshire Police released a summary of findings. Over 1,800 homes had been searched, 1,500 statements taken, and the cost of the investigation was nearing £3.2 million. Officers defended their approach, stating that they had followed every lead in good faith. Despite the deception, they emphasized that the priority had always been Shannon's safe recovery. Interviews with Donovan continued. He repeated that Karen had promised him a share of the reward and would collect Shannon when the time was right. Donovan maintained he had no intention of harming the child and claimed he became increasingly anxious as the days passed. He said he feared being caught, but was also afraid to release her. Karen refused to admit guilt. She told police she had been misled and that Donovan had acted alone. Detectives presented her with evidence, including call logs, witness testimonies, and Shannon's own words. Karen offered no plausible explanation for the inconsistencies. The case was handed over to the Crown Prosecution Service, and preparations for trial began. The full extent of the plot was now clear. A calculated attempt to deceive the public, gain financially, and manipulate an entire community. The trial would soon determine accountability and justice. The trial of Karen Matthews and Michael Donovan began on November 11, 2008, at Leeds Crown Court. Both defendants pleaded not guilty to the charges of kidnap, false imprisonment, and perverting the course of justice. The proceedings were presided over by Mr. Justice McComb and drew intense media attention, with reporters from across the UK covering the case. The prosecution outlined its central argument, that Karen Matthews and Michael Donovan had planned and executed the false abduction of Shannon Matthews to gain financial reward and public sympathy. Prosecutor Julian Goose QC's told the jury that the plan involved drugging and hiding Shannon in Donovan's flat for an extended period. The goal, he said, was for Shannon to be found at a key moment, with Karen benefiting from the ensuing attention and reward fund. Evidence presented included phone records showing regular contact between Matthews and Donovan before and during Shannon's disappearance. The jury was shown call logs, text messages, and surveillance records. These communications were described as critical in coordinating the concealment and eventual planned recovery. Forensic evidence supported the prosecution's case. Medication found at Donovan's flat matched drugs detected in Shannon's system. Expert testimony confirmed the sedatives could have caused drowsiness and confusion, consistent with Shannon's condition when she was found. The court heard that Shannon had been kept under Donovan's bed in a drawer-like compartment, secured with a strap. Officers described how the compartment had been adapted to keep her confined. Images of the bed setup were shown to the jury, and officers described finding her frightened but responsive when they entered the room. Witnesses included neighbors, police officers, and forensic specialists. Key among them were the officers who had found Shannon, who testified about the moment she was discovered and her physical and emotional state. Medical staff who examined Shannon also gave evidence, stating she was undernourished and affected by the medication. Karen Matthews' defense argued that she had been manipulated by Donovan, whom they described as controlling and unstable. Her barrister claimed that Karen was vulnerable, easily influenced, and did not fully grasp the implications of her actions. They maintained she did not knowingly participate in the abduction. Donovan's defense presented him as someone suffering from significant mental health issues, including agoraphobia and anxiety. His legal team claimed he had been pressured by Karen and feared the consequences of disobedience. However, the prosecution countered that both parties were active participants in the deception. One of the most significant moments in the trial came when Shannon's recorded interviews with social workers and police were played in court. In the videos, Shannon described being instructed to stay quiet, being given medicine that made her sleepy, and being told her mother would soon come to get her. Her testimony, although given through intermediaries, reinforced the case against both defendants. The jury also heard that Karen had previously coached Shannon on how to behave if found. A notebook found at Karen's home allegedly included a checklist of statements Shannon was to remember. The prosecution described this as further evidence of planning and manipulation. Public interest in the trial remained high throughout. Outside the courtroom, debates raged about the motives behind the crime and what it revealed about social dynamics and media coverage in missing child cases. Commentators questioned how someone could use their child in such a way, and whether earlier scrutiny could have prevented the deception. After a trial lasting over 3 weeks, the jury returned its verdict on December 4th, 2008. Both Karen Matthews and Michael Donovan were found guilty on all counts. The judge praised the police for their thorough work and criticized the defendants for their cruelty and deceit. Sentencing was scheduled for January 23, 2009. On that day, both Matthews and Donovan were sentenced to 8 years in prison. In his remarks, Mr. Justice McComb described the plan as truly despicable, noting that it involved the deliberate perversion of justice and abuse of trust. As the court adjourned, the story that had captured national attention for nearly a year reached its legal conclusion. The facts of the case had been laid bare: a staged abduction, a manipulated public, and a young girl used as a pawn in a cynical scheme. The conviction of Karen Matthews and Michael Donovan reverberated far beyond the courtroom. Public and media reactions were immediate and intense. In Dewsbury Moor, where the community had mobilized in support of Shannon's family, feelings of betrayal were widespread. Many residents who had participated in searches, distributed flyers, or donated money expressed outrage and disbelief. Local volunteer groups dismantled their operations. Posters were removed from shop windows. Some residents who had publicly supported Karen voiced regret, while others demanded inquiries into how the deception had gone undetected for so long. Community centers hosted meetings to address the fallout and provide support to residents, especially those close to Shannon. National newspapers ran editorials condemning Karen Matthews. Headlines described her as manipulative and cruel. Comparisons to the McCann case resurfaced, with some commentators questioning whether socioeconomic biases had influenced the handling and perception of both cases. Discussions about media ethics, class, and the role of sensationalism in missing person investigations intensified. Public trust in Karen Matthews evaporated. Her televised appeals, once seen as heartfelt, were now viewed through a lens of manipulation. Video clips of her holding Shannon's teddy bear were replayed, now underscored by analysis of her body language and vocal tone. Experts in criminal behavior contributed to media coverage, examining the psychological dimensions of the case. West Yorkshire Police issued a formal statement defending their investigation. Officers explained that every report and lead had been pursued in good faith, and that the deception was highly sophisticated. They emphasized that the safety of Shannon had always been the primary objective. Chief Constable Norman Bettison thanked the community for its assistance and stressed the complexity of identifying staged crimes. The Home Office also commented, stating that while rare, such cases highlighted the need for careful investigation protocols. Senior officials acknowledged the emotional toll on officers and communities involved in large-scale search operations. Discussions began about improving systems for early detection of false reports, without discouraging genuine appeals. Crime Stoppers, which had helped raise part of the reward fund, confirmed that the full £50,000 reward had not been paid out. Donors requested reassurance that future campaigns would include stronger safeguards. Some newspapers that had promoted the reward ran follow-up features evaluating how public trust had been exploited. The case prompted inquiries into how the Matthews children had been cared for before and during Shannon's disappearance. Social services in Kirklees reviewed their previous involvement with the family. A serious case review was launched to determine whether there had been missed opportunities to intervene earlier. The findings noted that while individual agencies had acted appropriately, communication between services could be improved. Shannon, meanwhile, was placed under a long-term care arrangement. Her location and new identity were protected under a court order. Psychological assessments indicated trauma, but also resilience. Therapists reported gradual improvement in her well-being, aided by a stable and supportive environment. Sibling placements were managed carefully to maintain familial connections where possible. In media and academic circles, the case became a subject of study. Researchers examined how class perceptions influenced both the investigation and media portrayal. Documentaries were produced exploring the timeline and impact of the case. Interviews with journalists, officers, and community members offered deeper insight into how events had unfolded. The local council in Dewsbury supported outreach programs aimed at rebuilding trust and strengthening community cohesion. Funding was allocated to youth services, education, and neighborhood watch groups. These measures were intended to help residents process the case and move forward. Over time, public attention shifted to other events. However, the Matthews case remained a reference point in discussions about child protection, media ethics, and criminal deception. The shock of a mother staging her daughter's kidnapping for profit left a lasting imprint on public consciousness. In Dewsbury and beyond, the name Shannon Matthews continued to evoke both sorrow and hard lessons about the limits of trust and the consequences of exploitation. After her recovery, Shannon Matthews became the subject of a comprehensive child protection strategy. Under the authority of a family court order, she was placed into foster care with a new identity to ensure her safety and privacy. The court ruled that she would remain under the supervision of social services, with restrictions on media access and public disclosure. Shannon's initial foster placement involved specialist carers experienced in trauma recovery. Medical and psychological evaluations revealed that she had suffered emotional stress and confusion during her 24-day confinement. Child psychologists determined that she displayed symptoms consistent with coercive control and manipulation, but showed potential for recovery with long-term support. Legal protections extended to all public references to Shannon's location, appearance, and daily life. Her schooling continued under strict anonymity. Teachers and carers were provided with briefings to support her social reintegration and academic development. Gradually, Shannon was able to participate in normal activities, although regular therapy remained a part of her routine. Karen Matthews retained no parental rights following her conviction. Social services conducted thorough assessments regarding Shannon's siblings. Each child's living situation was reviewed individually, with care arrangements based on their needs and emotional states. Sibling contact was maintained under supervision to preserve family bonds, where appropriate. In parallel, legal consequences unfolded for Craig Meehan. Although he was not charged in relation to the kidnapping, forensic analysis of his computer had uncovered indecent images of children. Meehan was arrested and, in September 2008, convicted on 11 counts of possessing child pornography. He was sentenced to 20 weeks in prison and placed on the sex offenders register for 5 years. The Serious Case Review into the Matthews household, published in 2009, identified concerns about the family's previous interactions with multiple agencies. It concluded that, while individual professionals had acted correctly, cumulative warning signs had not been effectively collated or addressed. Recommendations were made to improve interagency communication and risk assessment procedures. The review noted that Karen had displayed patterns of neglect and had allowed her children to be exposed to unsuitable adults. The children had experienced disrupted schooling, inconsistent discipline, and a chaotic home environment. These factors, combined with Karen's eventual actions, underscored the necessity for proactive child safeguarding reforms. During her imprisonment, Karen Matthews was held at Newhall Prison in West Yorkshire, then later transferred. She served half of her 8-year sentence as per standard practice, and was released in April 2012 under strict license conditions. Her release was controversial, prompting debate about prisoner rehabilitation and the risks of reoffending. She was rehoused and provided a new identity. Karen's release conditions included regular monitoring, restrictions on contact with children, and geographic limitations. Public reactions to her release were negative, with some former supporters expressing anger at her apparent lack of remorse. Media coverage was heavily redacted due to legal protections concerning Shannon. Michael Donovan also served half of his sentence and was released in 2012. Like Karen, he was subject to license conditions and public scrutiny. Authorities monitored his whereabouts, and community safety assessments were conducted prior to his release. His public appearances were minimal. The Crown Prosecution Service later confirmed that no further charges would be brought in connection to the abduction plot. Investigators had thoroughly examined all known contacts and financial records. No additional individuals were implicated beyond Matthews and Donovan. Years after the case, Shannon remained under protective care, with the support of foster parents and mental health professionals. She continued her education and received therapy tailored to her experiences. Reports indicated she was making progress in rebuilding trust and establishing a sense of stability. Judicial commentary at the time of sentencing had emphasized the lifelong impact of the crime on Shannon. The use of a child in a fabricated abduction scheme, the court noted, represented one of the most egregious violations of parental duty seen in recent years. Protecting Shannon from future harm became a shared priority among all involved agencies. While legal proceedings concluded with the sentencing of the perpetrators, efforts to ensure Shannon's welfare continued well beyond the trial. The trauma inflicted during those weeks in 2008 cast a long shadow, but with continued support, she was gradually reclaiming her life away from the public eye. The case of Shannon Matthews left a complex and enduring legacy. Beyond the immediate criminal proceedings and emotional impact, it prompted national reflection on child protection policies, media coverage, and public perceptions of class and credibility. It became a benchmark for evaluating missing child investigations and societal responses to exploitation. One of the most immediate effects was a re-examination of multi-agency cooperation in safeguarding vulnerable children. The Serious Case Review, published in 2009, identified critical gaps in information sharing among schools, social services, and law enforcement. As a result, Kirklees Council and regional authorities implemented new protocols to better coordinate oversight and risk assessment of families with known vulnerabilities. In Parliament, MPs debated how the system had failed to detect warning signs in the Matthews household. Although there was no evidence of abuse prior to the kidnapping, neglect and instability had been reported. Recommendations from the review influenced broader child welfare reforms, contributing to updates in statutory guidance under Working Together to Safeguard Children. The case also reignited debate about the role of the media in missing person investigations. In particular, the disparity in coverage between the Matthews and McCann cases became a focal point. Critics pointed to how socioeconomic status, family background, and perceived respectability may influence media interest and public empathy. News outlets later acknowledged that early reporting relied heavily on Karen Matthews's public persona. Her emotional appeals were initially taken at face value, contributing to a narrative of maternal distress. Post-trial analysis revealed that many assumptions had been based on appearances rather than scrutiny of background or behavior. Journalists and editors responded with editorials reflecting on the lessons of the case. Discussions about media responsibility, ethical reporting, and the impact of premature conclusions led to internal reviews at several national newspapers. Broadcasters introduced guidelines to balance urgency with accuracy in similar investigations. Academics and criminologists studied the Matthews case as an example of criminal fabrication and the misuse of social systems. It became a topic in university courses examining deception, public policy, and crisis communication. Research papers analyzed the psychological factors behind the scheme, noting that motivations included financial desperation, attention-seeking, and misguided opportunism. Cultural responses also emerged. Documentaries, dramas, and retrospectives explored the events from various angles. Some productions were met with criticism, especially those perceived to sensationalize the crime. Others were praised for highlighting systemic issues and giving voice to overlooked aspects of the investigation. In Dewsbury Moor, the aftermath was deeply felt. The community, once united in search efforts, struggled with the revelation of betrayal from within. Trust in neighbors and local networks was damaged. Over time, initiatives aimed at healing the community were introduced. Outreach programs, school-based support, and neighborhood forums played a role in slowly rebuilding cohesion. Shannon Matthews, protected by anonymity, grew up largely away from the spotlight. Her story was referenced in media coverage, but without identifiable details. Child advocacy groups stressed the importance of preserving her privacy and supporting her continued recovery. Her well-being remained a priority for professionals involved in her care. Karen Matthews, released in 2012, retained notoriety. Media interest in her post-prison life persisted, though coverage was limited due to legal restrictions. Attempts to secure television deals or interviews were met with public criticism. She relocated under a new identity, with contact restrictions in place to protect Shannon and her siblings. Michael Donovan's post-release life was largely undocumented. He returned to anonymity, with public concerns about his release briefly resurfacing at the time. Law enforcement maintained oversight under license conditions, as per standard practice. Ultimately, the Shannon Matthews case serves as a stark example of how public trust can be manipulated, how vulnerable individuals can be exploited, and how systems intended to protect can be misused. It also demonstrated the capacity for recovery, institutional learning, and public accountability. The legacy is a reminder of the need for vigilance, empathy, and critical scrutiny, especially when a child's welfare is at stake. Though the events unfolded over just a few weeks in 2008, their consequences will continue to inform child protection and investigative procedures for years to come. Nicole White, a 28-year-old mother of two from Ording, Washington, was known for her bright smile and fierce devotion to her children. She was described by friends and family as caring and generous, someone who lit up the room with her presence. Her life, however, took a tragic turn in early June 2015. On the evening of Saturday, June 6th, Nicole had arranged to meet someone she had connected with online, 36-year-old Jonathan C. Harris. The two planned to spend time together at Jeepers Country Bar and Grill in Spanaway, a popular local spot known for live music and a lively weekend crowd. Nicole left her home that evening in her red Dodge Neon, anticipating a simple night out. That night, Nicole texted a friend from the bar, sharing that she was with Harris. Later, she stopped responding to messages. The next morning, her family grew concerned when she failed to return home or respond to calls. Nicole's absence was uncharacteristic. She always kept in close contact with her children and her mother. Her mother reported her missing the following day, launching what would become a multi-agency search. Nicole's disappearance rattled the small town of Orting. The early investigation involved interviewing friends, combing social media for clues, and reviewing surveillance footage from Jeepers. Witnesses confirmed that Nicole had been at the bar with Harris, but after leaving, her whereabouts were unknown. With no sign of her car or her phone activity, urgency mounted. As the hours turned to days, concern gave way to fear. Nicole's children were placed in the care of relatives, while her mother made public appeals for any information that could help locate her daughter. Authorities circulated missing person flyers and began tracing digital footprints and any potential leads. The timeline of Nicole's last known movements painted a troubling picture. Her phone had last pinged near the rural Lake Kapowsin area in Pierce County. Investigators shifted focus toward that region, aware of its dense woods and secluded roads. With increasing suspicion about Jonathan Harris's involvement, they sought to understand the circumstances of Nicole's final known night. As the search intensified, the public began following Nicole's story closely. Community members volunteered to help look for her, organizing search parties and distributing flyers. Law enforcement coordinated efforts with multiple agencies to explore leads that were gradually beginning to point toward foul play. The mystery surrounding Nicole's disappearance was beginning to unravel, but what had started as a hopeful search for a missing woman would soon turn into a grim criminal investigation. In the days following Nicole White's disappearance, law enforcement expanded their search radius across rural Pierce County. Detectives from the Pierce County Sheriff's Department worked in coordination with the FBI and local volunteers to scour potential locations tied to her last known cell phone activity. A key lead emerged when Nicole's red Dodge Neon was found abandoned near the remote Lake Kapowsin area. The car, Missing its license plates had been hidden down an embankment. Its discovery raised immediate suspicion, as Nicole was not known to frequent the area. Inside the vehicle, her purse and other personal items were absent, and there were no immediate signs of struggle. With Nicole's last known location confirmed near Lake Kapowsin, authorities launched a focused search of the surrounding forested terrain. The thick woods and undergrowth made the effort slow and arduous. K-9 search teams were brought in to assist, while drones surveyed from above. Meanwhile, Nicole's family remained at the forefront of public appeals, urging anyone with information to come forward. A Facebook page dedicated to the search grew rapidly, filled with messages of support and shared updates from law enforcement. Community members organized search groups, canvassed nearby towns, and handed out flyers. Attention soon turned to Jonathan Harris, the last known person to see Nicole. Investigators questioned him, seeking details about their night together. Harris provided an account that raised eyebrows. He claimed that after leaving the bar, Nicole became upset and exited his vehicle, choosing to walk home on her own. Investigators found this explanation unlikely, especially considering the isolated and dark area near Lake Kapowsin. Search teams returned repeatedly to the ravines and back roads of the region. Creek beds, ravines, and wooded slopes were examined inch by inch. Days passed without a breakthrough, but investigators remained focused, relying heavily on the K-9 units. At the same time, forensic analysts examined Nicole's digital footprints. Her phone had stopped transmitting data shortly after 1:30 a.m. on June 7th, in an area just south of Lake Kapowsin. That narrow window became the critical focus of the investigation. Despite the absence of solid evidence, law enforcement's growing suspicions about Harris's involvement intensified. But with no body and no conclusive proof of foul play, progress was painstakingly slow. Public concern deepened as 2 weeks went by. Still, Nicole's family refused to give up hope. Her mother continued to speak to media outlets, urging continued vigilance and pleading for answers. Law enforcement knew that time was working against them, but they also believed that they were getting closer. On June 20th, a full 2 weeks after Nicole vanished, a glimmer of resolution finally emerged. On the morning of June 20th, 2015, the search for Nicole White came to a heartbreaking conclusion. A K-9 unit working a ravine just south of Lake Kapowsin made a grim discovery. A human body, wrapped in a green tarp, concealed beneath debris in a steep forested slope. Pierce County Sheriff's deputies arrived quickly to secure the scene. Though there was no immediate confirmation, the body matched Nicole's description. The tarp had been weighed down with branches and partially hidden beneath underbrush, suggesting deliberate concealment. Forensic investigators began processing the site. The area was remote and difficult to access, reinforcing the theory that someone had gone to considerable effort to hide the remains. Detectives observed the condition of the tarp and surrounding evidence with care, collecting fibers, soil samples, and photographing the scene meticulously. The body was transported to the Pierce County Medical Examiner's office, where an autopsy confirmed it was Nicole White. The examination revealed that she had suffered multiple blunt force injuries, including fractures to her skull and ribs. The official cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma. The report concluded the manner of death was homicide. The news devastated Nicole's family and the Ording community. Vigils were held in her memory, with community members lighting candles and leaving flowers near the bar where she was last seen. Many expressed sorrow, but also anger, wanting justice for the senseless violence inflicted upon her. Attention once again turned to Jonathan Harris. with Nicole's body found in a location near where his vehicle's GPS and interlock device had recorded activity. Investigators intensified their scrutiny. They now had a body, a location, and a suspect whose previous statements did not align with the unfolding evidence. Media coverage ramped up, and details of the case were broadcast across local and regional outlets. The public, already invested in Nicole's story, followed developments closely, eager to see justice delivered. Detectives continued analyzing all available data. They re-examined cell phone records, GPS data, and witness statements. Everything now pointed toward premeditation and deliberate concealment. The discovery of the body not only confirmed suspicions of foul play, it galvanized the investigation. Nicole's family released a statement thanking the public for their support and the search teams for their persistence. Their grief was profound, but their resolve was stronger than ever. They now looked to the justice system to hold the person responsible accountable. As law enforcement closed in on Jonathan Harris, prosecutors prepared for the next steps. A case that began with a missing person report had become a murder investigation. The truth behind Nicole's final hours was beginning to surface. With Nicole White's body recovered and autopsy results confirming homicide, Pierce County investigators intensified their efforts to build a solid case against Jonathan Harris. Their focus now shifted from a search to a criminal investigation grounded in forensics, digital data, and surveillance. Cell phone records became a vital piece of the puzzle. Investigators traced the movements of both Nicole's and Harris's phones during the critical hours of June 6th into the early morning of June 7th. The data revealed that both devices were in proximity near the Lake Kapowsin area, the same place where Nicole's body was later found. Her phone stopped transmitting data shortly after 1:30 a.m., consistent with the estimated time of death provided by the medical examiner. Another significant lead came from Harris's own vehicle. His car was equipped with an ignition interlock device, a system installed after a previous DUI offense. The device not only prevented operation without a breath test, but also logged GPS data. Those records placed Harris's vehicle near the ravine where Nicole's body was discovered, around the same time her phone went dark. Investigators secured a warrant to search Harris's home in Thurston County. Inside, they discovered clothing that appeared to be stained with blood. The garments were sent to a crime lab for testing. Results confirmed that the blood matched Nicole White's DNA profile. The physical evidence linked Harris directly to the crime scene and the victim. Simultaneously, surveillance footage from Jeepers Country Bar and Grill confirmed Nicole and Harris had left together that night. Witnesses corroborated that they had seemed friendly, and no one reported any visible conflict between them. However, Harris's earlier claim that Nicole had asked to be dropped off and chose to walk home was contradicted by the data placing both him and the victim in a remote location miles away from her house. In addition to physical evidence, investigators reviewed Harris's digital communications. Text messages and phone logs suggested he had been in regular contact with Nicole leading up to the night they met. There was nothing in the messages that indicated hostility or danger, but the abrupt halt of communication after that night aligned with the timeline of her disappearance. The accumulating evidence formed a compelling narrative. Prosecutors are now confident they could bring a murder charge. Detectives compiled their findings into a detailed affidavit, citing GPS logs, phone records, witness accounts, forensic lab results, and the suspicious behavior that followed Nicole's disappearance. By late June, the pieces had coalesced into a clear picture of the events. Nicole's final hours were no longer a mystery, and the person responsible could no longer hide behind false explanations. The next step was arresting Jonathan Harris and formally charging him. Authorities were ready. On June 25, 2015, law enforcement officers arrested Jonathan C. Harris at his residence. The arrest followed weeks of accumulating evidence and came just days after Nicole White's body had been recovered. Harris was charged with second-degree murder, a decision based on the belief that, while the crime was intentional, it was not premeditated under the strict legal definition. He was taken into custody without incident. Harris showed no resistance and made no immediate public statement. At the time of the arrest, he was placed in the Pierce County Jail, held without bail. News of the arrest spread quickly across the region, bringing a mix of relief and anger to a community still mourning Nicole's death. At his initial court appearance, prosecutors outlined the key elements of the case. They cited GPS evidence from Harris's vehicle, the presence of Nicole's blood on clothing found in his home, and the discovery of her body in an area he had been confirmed to visit. The court was also told about discrepancies in Harris's account, including his claim that Nicole had chosen to walk home alone, which was contradicted by physical and digital evidence. The judge agreed with the prosecution's assessment, citing the strength of the evidence and the gravity of the charge. Bail was denied. The courtroom was filled with members of Nicole's family and supporters. Her mother sat quietly, her expression a mixture of grief and determination. Outside the courthouse, she spoke briefly to reporters, expressing gratitude that an arrest had been made, but noting that no legal action could bring her daughter back. Community reaction was swift and vocal. People who had followed the case closely since Nicole's disappearance shared their thoughts online, calling for justice and supporting her family. Social media posts reflected collective anger, sorrow, and a call for accountability. Candlelight vigils were held again in her honor, this time in recognition of the steps being taken toward justice. Law enforcement officials emphasized that the arrest was the result of tireless work by investigators, analysts, and search personnel. They credited the community for maintaining pressure and for assisting with tips and leads throughout the investigation. At a press conference, a Pierce County Sheriff's representative praised the resilience of Nicole's family and promised that they would continue to pursue a conviction with all available resources. Harris was assigned a public defender, and the legal process began in earnest. Over the coming weeks, both the prosecution and defense reviewed the evidence, and the case moved toward a pre-trial hearing. Prosecutors indicated they would push for a strong sentence if Harris were convicted, citing the violent nature of the crime and the efforts to conceal the body. With the arrest now public, the central question turned to the courtroom. How would justice be served for Nicole White? As the case moved into the legal phase, prosecutors and defense attorneys entered negotiations behind closed doors. The evidence against Jonathan Harris was substantial, but a full trial carried uncertainties. After several weeks of deliberations, Harris agreed to a plea deal. In August 2015, Harris formally pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in the death of Nicole White. In court, he admitted to killing her during an altercation after they left the bar. According to the plea statement, an argument escalated, and Harris struck Nicole multiple times, eventually killing her and later disposing of her body in a wooded ravine. The plea agreement eliminated the need for a trial, sparing Nicole's family the anguish of hearing the details unfold in open court. However, it also meant that some questions, particularly regarding Harris's motive, would remain unanswered. Prosecutors explained that the plea deal ensured a significant prison sentence while avoiding the potential risks of trial. They believed the strength of the forensic evidence supported their case, but they weighed the emotional toll and unpredictability of a courtroom battle. The agreement included a recommended sentence of more than 26 years in prison. a term consistent with the statutory guidelines for second-degree murder in Washington state. Nicole's family was present during the hearing. Her mother, while outwardly composed, expressed frustration with the outcome. She told reporters afterward that, while they appreciated the certainty of a conviction, the sentence did not reflect the full gravity of what had been done to Nicole. She spoke of the pain her grandchildren would live with and the void left in their lives. The judge accepted the plea and scheduled sentencing for the following month. In the interim, a pre-sentence investigation was conducted, gathering additional background on Harris and assessing the impact of the crime on the victim's family. The prosecution submitted statements detailing Nicole's life, her role as a mother, and the trauma inflicted by her loss. Meanwhile, the defense presented mitigating factors, including Harris's lack of prior violent offenses and a history of substance abuse. His attorneys argued that while the crime was brutal, it was not premeditated, and their client had shown remorse by accepting the plea. The legal community debated the outcome. Some believed the plea was pragmatic and spared further trauma, while others questioned whether justice had been fully served. For Nicole's family, the deal provided closure, but not peace. As the sentencing date approached, both sides prepared for final arguments. Harris would soon learn his fate, and Nicole's loved ones would have a chance to address the court directly. On September 25, 2015, Jonathan Harris stood before a Pierce County judge to be sentenced for the murder of Nicole White. The courtroom was filled with family members, friends, and community supporters of Nicole, all gathered to witness the conclusion of a tragic chapter. Harris, wearing jail-issued clothing, showed little emotion as the proceedings began. Prosecutors reviewed the facts once more, reiterating that Harris had beaten Nicole to death and taken deliberate steps to conceal her body. They emphasized the brutality of the crime and the lasting impact on Nicole's children and family. The judge was asked to impose the maximum sentence permitted under the plea agreement. Nicole's mother addressed the court during the victim impact statements. Fighting through tears, she spoke about the pain of losing her daughter, the heartbreak of explaining Nicole's absence to her young children, and the enduring trauma inflicted by Harris's actions. Other relatives shared memories of Nicole's kindness, her devotion to her kids, and the depth of their loss. When given the opportunity to speak, Harris expressed regret but offered little detail. His brief statement acknowledged responsibility but avoided specifics. His defense attorney described his client as remorseful and reiterated that Harris had chosen to plead guilty to spare the family a painful trial. The judge sentenced Harris to 320 months in prison, just over 26 and a half years. The sentence aligned with Washington's guidelines for second-degree murder and the terms of the plea agreement. Harris was also ordered to pay restitution for funeral expenses and other court-related costs. Following sentencing, Harris attempted to withdraw his guilty plea, claiming that his attorney had pressured him and that he had not fully understood the consequences. He filed a motion arguing ineffective legal counsel and lack of comprehension of the plea's implications. The court reviewed Harris's claims but ultimately denied the motion. A judge ruled that Harris had been adequately informed of his rights and had voluntarily entered the plea in open court. The sentence was upheld, and Harris was transferred to the Washington State Department of Corrections to begin serving his time. Nicole's family issued a public statement expressing relief that the legal process had ended, but reiterated their belief that the punishment did not reflect the full weight of the crime. They thanked the community and law enforcement for their support and emphasized the importance of remembering Nicole as more than a victim, as a mother, daughter, and friend. With Harris behind bars, the case formally concluded. But for those who loved Nicole White, the road to healing was only beginning. The murder of Nicole White left a lasting scar on the small community of Ording, Washington. In the months and years that followed, her name became synonymous with both tragedy and the resilience of those determined to honor her memory. Nicole's family turned their grief into advocacy. They began speaking out about the dangers of online dating, urging caution and awareness. Her mother, in particular, became a vocal presence, participating in local events and safety forums. She stressed the importance of meeting in public places, informing friends or family of plans, and paying attention to potential red flags. Several community groups organized awareness campaigns inspired by Nicole's story. Workshops and seminars were held to educate teens and adults about digital safety, consent, and the risks of meeting strangers through online platforms. Local law enforcement supported these efforts, recognizing that Nicole's case had revealed a gap in public understanding of how quickly online interactions could turn dangerous. In schools, educators use the case as a teaching tool, presenting it within broader discussions about personal safety, relationships, and digital behavior. While the subject was sobering, the message resonated. Taking precautions is not about fear, but about empowerment and protection. The bar where Nicole was last seen briefly became a site of memorial. Patrons left flowers, candles, and photos near the entrance. Though the establishment eventually returned to business as usual, the memory of that night lingered for many who had been there or who knew Nicole personally. Each year, on the anniversary of Nicole's disappearance, friends and relatives gathered to hold vigils in her honor. These events were marked by moments of silence, shared stories, and commitments to keep her memory alive. Her children, still young at the time of her death, were surrounded by extended family, determined to raise them in a world that remembered who their mother was. Media coverage of the case gradually faded, but Nicole's name continued to surface in online forums, crime prevention groups, and in the homes of those impacted. Some true crime podcasts revisited her story, focusing on the investigative techniques that brought her killer to justice. Law enforcement officials who had worked the case also reflected on its impact. For many, it was a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of meticulous investigative work. Detectives noted how technology, from phone records to GPS devices, had been pivotal in solving the crime. Though justice had been served in the legal sense, Nicole White's death left questions that could never be fully answered. But through advocacy, education, and remembrance, her life continued to shape conversations and efforts far beyond the boundaries of Ording. Nicole's story became not only a cautionary tale, but a call to action, a reminder to value life, to protect one another, and to never take safety for granted. Samantha Koenig was 18 years old, bright, and known for her spirited personality. Living in Anchorage, Alaska, she worked at the Common Grounds espresso stand on Tudor Road to support herself. The coffee kiosk, like many in Alaska, was a small self-contained unit, typically manned by a single barista during each shift. On the evening of February 1st, 2012, Samantha was working alone, as she often did, in a location that was familiar to her and frequented by regulars. The evening started out uneventfully. Around 8 p.m., she texted her boyfriend, letting him know she'd be done with her shift by 8:30. The streets of Anchorage were coated in snow, the winter evening unusually still. At approximately 8 p.m., surveillance footage from the coffee stand captured a man approaching the window. The figure appeared to be a customer, and Samantha served him as she would anyone else. What followed was a harrowing sequence. After a brief exchange, Samantha was seen stepping back from the window, hands raised. The man jumped into the stand, and at gunpoint, forced her to the floor. He zip-tied her wrists and directed her out the stand's back exit. Outside, she tried to flee, but he tackled her. He then forced her into a vehicle and drove off. The security footage ended with an empty kiosk and no sign of Samantha. Later that night, when Samantha didn't return home or respond to messages, her boyfriend grew concerned. He contacted her father, who went to the kiosk and discovered it empty and dark. Alarmed, he called police. An official missing person report was filed that night, triggering what would become one of the most intense investigations in Anchorage's recent history. By morning, word of Samantha's disappearance had spread. Flyers with her photo, long brown hair, brown eyes, and a bright smile began appearing throughout Anchorage. Friends and family organized search parties. Local residents, galvanized by fear and concern, offered help in any way they could. Yet, the initial hours passed with no word from Samantha, no signs, and no contact. The absence of any communication was ominous. Police reviewed the surveillance footage and saw what had transpired. The footage was haunting, and its release to the public sent a chill through the community. It was clear this wasn't a runaway case. This was a targeted abduction. The Anchorage Police Department began treating the case as a kidnapping, calling in the FBI for assistance. As the first 24 hours passed, the case took on a sense of urgency. Winter temperatures in Anchorage dropped well below freezing at night. Time, already critical in abduction cases, was made more so by the harsh environmental conditions. The question everyone asked remained unanswered. Where was Samantha Koenig? The Anchorage Police Department, now collaborating with the FBI, prioritized the immediate analysis of the surveillance footage from the night of February 1st. It provided the first concrete lead, a male suspect, approximately 6 feet tall, wearing a ski mask, heavy clothing, and gloves. He appeared calculated and calm, not hurried or impulsive. The footage revealed that he had been at the kiosk for several minutes, orchestrating the abduction in a systematic, chilling manner. As investigators combed through the area, they interviewed witnesses who had driven past the kiosk that night. A few recalled seeing a figure, possibly male, loitering nearby, but none reported anything unusual until learning of the abduction the next day. Police scoured the vicinity, checking for additional surveillance cameras at nearby businesses and homes. Leads were limited. The perpetrator had left no immediate forensic evidence, and Samantha's phone had gone silent. Friends and family maintained hope that Samantha would return safely. They organized vigils and distributed posters throughout the city and across social media platforms. Community response was overwhelming. Hundreds participated in the search, combing wooded areas, snowbanks, and abandoned lots, while others donated funds to help the family. The media picked up the story quickly. Local stations broadcast updates frequently, and national coverage followed, highlighting the unusual nature of the abduction. A young woman taken from her workplace without a trace under watchful security cameras. It left Anchorage shaken. Investigators interviewed Samantha's boyfriend and family extensively. While he was initially under scrutiny, it became clear that he was not involved. His alibi checked out, and there was no history of conflict or suspicious behavior. Focus turned back to the masked man in the footage. Authorities revisited the scene, searching for anything that might have been overlooked. A dropped item, tire tracks, or footprints in the snow. However, snowfall that night had obscured the area, washing away what little trace evidence there might have been. Detectives began to analyze Samantha's life more deeply, trying to determine if she had any enemies, or if this could have been someone she knew. But the theory that this was a random abduction grew stronger. A special tip line was created. Calls flooded in, but none brought them closer to Samantha. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit reviewed the case and concluded the abduction was likely the work of someone who had planned the crime and had done something similar before. The calm demeanor, use of restraints, and choice of victim all suggested experience. With each passing day, the trail grew colder. No ransom, no communication, no confirmed sightings. While the family clung to hope, investigators feared the worst. But 10 days after the abduction, everything changed. On February 11th, a text message was sent from Samantha's phone to her boyfriend's number. It said Samantha was alive and provided instructions on where a ransom note could be found. Hope surged, but the grim reality of the situation was just beginning to unfold. The text message arrived unexpectedly on February 11th. It was brief and direct. A ransom demand, accompanied by directions to a location in Connors Bog Park in Anchorage. Samantha's boyfriend and her father immediately contacted law enforcement. Investigators moved quickly, fearing that any delay might endanger her life. The park, blanketed in snow, was cordoned off and searched thoroughly. Beneath a memorial poster of Samantha pinned to a bulletin board, they found a plastic bag. Inside was a ransom note and a Polaroid-style photograph. The image showed Samantha sitting upright, eyes open, with braided hair. Next to her was a copy of the Anchorage Daily News, dated February 13th. The presence of the newspaper was a chilling message. It suggested she was still alive as of that date. Her expression, however, was blank, and some detectives privately noted that something seemed off. Still, the family clung to the hope the photo represented. The ransom note demanded $30,000 to be deposited into Samantha's bank account. It also warned against police involvement. The Koenig family, desperate for her safe return, agreed to the demand. The funds were deposited as instructed. Authorities, working discreetly, began monitoring the account, hoping the kidnapper would access the money and leave a trail. Weeks passed without activity. Then, in early March, Samantha's debit card was used in Wilcox, Arizona. The FBI began a multi-state operation, monitoring ATM transactions. The card was used again in Lordsburg, New Mexico, then in Shepherd, Texas. Surveillance footage from ATM cameras captured a person in a mask and hood, making withdrawals from each location. Though the individual's identity was concealed, the car was visible, a white Ford Focus. Each withdrawal was under the daily limit, suggesting the perpetrator was cautious, aware of law enforcement tracking protocols. He moved eastward across the southern U.S., sticking to remote areas, avoiding direct contact with people, and minimizing surveillance exposure. Law enforcement coordinated efforts across states, enlisting the help of local police at each location. The FBI's strategy was to wait for another ATM transaction and close in before he moved again. On March 13th, 2012, the card was used once more in Lufkin, Texas. Police spotted the white Ford Focus nearby and conducted a traffic stop. Inside the vehicle was a man in his 30s, calm and cooperative. He identified himself as Israel Keys. A search of the vehicle revealed a ski mask, gloves, a roll of Samantha Koenig's ATM card, and a gun. Also found were dyed bills matching the ransom withdrawal records. The circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Though initially arrested for fraud and identity theft, authorities believed they had found the man responsible for Samantha's disappearance. But where was she? And was she still alive? Keys was extradited to Anchorage, where investigators prepared to question him. Unbeknownst to them, they were about to uncover one of the most disturbing criminal cases in American history, one that would stretch far beyond the abduction of Samantha Koenig. With Israel Keyes in custody, investigators began compiling every available piece of evidence. His white Ford Focus had yielded key items: the ATM card, Samantha's cell phone, a .22 caliber pistol, and dyed cash linked to the ransom withdrawals. But Keyes remained silent. He offered no information about Samantha's whereabouts, and law enforcement had no confirmation of whether she was alive or dead. Authorities executed search warrants on Keyes' property in Anchorage. His home, a modest structure located just a few miles from the coffee stand, appeared unremarkable. Yet inside, investigators found signs of careful planning and chilling efficiency. Digital evidence from his laptop and cell phone was collected, while the grounds were examined for any trace of the missing teen. Under increasing pressure, Keyes finally agreed to speak, but only under certain conditions. He demanded anonymity, a swift execution date, and restricted media coverage. In exchange, he promised to provide details about Samantha Koenig and other crimes. The FBI, eager for information, began a series of recorded interviews. In his early confessions, Keyes was composed and methodical. He revealed that Samantha had not been alive in the time the ransom photo was sent. He had abducted her on February 1st, taken her to a shed at his home, and killed her the next day. He left her body in the shed, went on a pre-planned cruise with his family, and returned later to stage the ransom photograph using a frozen corpse and makeup to give the appearance she was still alive. He braided her hair and propped her up using fishing line and other tools, placing the Anchorage Daily News beside her. He then took the photo and used it to write the ransom note left at Connor's Bog Park. Investigators were stunned. The level of deception was unlike anything they had encountered. The man they were questioning was highly intelligent, deeply calculating, and devoid of remorse. Keyes described the murder as something he had to do, a chilling indication of his motives. Using financial records and surveillance logs, law enforcement retraced Keyes' steps. The withdrawal trail had begun in Arizona, following a careful, premeditated route across the Southwest and into Texas. Every stop had been made with the intent of creating a false sense of hope. Each ATM transaction suggesting Samantha might still be alive. The strategy was clear: mislead, manipulate, and buy time. Keyes disclosed where he had disposed of Samantha's body. Authorities traveled to Matanuska Lake, just north of Anchorage, where divers eventually recovered her remains. The confirmation ended any hope the Koenig family had clung to. She had been dead for weeks, even as the public searched and prayed. The investigation into Keyes expanded. He was not simply a kidnapper and murderer, he was something far worse. Evidence began to mount that Samantha Koenig was not his first victim, and according to Keyes, she wouldn't have been his last. Israel Keyes' capture in Lufkin, Texas, marked a turning point. Though initially arrested for fraudulent use of Samantha Koenig's debit card, authorities suspected he was behind far more serious crimes. The vehicle stop had produced direct links to the Anchorage case, and within days, Keyes was transferred to Alaska under tight security. Upon arrival, Keyes was held at the Anchorage Correctional Complex. Law enforcement agencies, including the Anchorage Police Department and the FBI, began preparing for extensive interrogations. While Keyes appeared cooperative, he remained guarded, speaking only when it served his interests. He reiterated his terms: no media exposure, minimal publicity, and the possibility of a swift death sentence. He had no interest in a trial. Investigators meticulously examined his digital devices. They discovered traces of online research related to police procedures, bank withdrawals, and details about past disappearances. GPS data from his travels helped confirm the ATM withdrawal trail, and mapped out his cross-country movements following the ransom note. Each element reinforced the image of a man who had planned his crimes down to the finest detail. Evidence from his Anchorage home also supported law enforcement's timeline. The shed where Samantha had been held and later killed was outfitted with tools, restraints, and other equipment. Keyes had cleaned the area, but forensic teams uncovered blood traces and fibers matching Samantha's clothing. The horror of what had happened there was now undeniable. During interviews, Keyes gradually revealed more information. He confirmed that he had acted alone and that Samantha had not known him prior to the abduction. He chose her at random, though with care. He had surveilled the coffee stand, learning the schedule and waiting for the right moment. The location was ideal, isolated, lightly monitored, and staffed by a single young employee. It was, in his own words, an opportunity. He explained how, after abducting Samantha, he had taken her phone and debit card, forcing her to provide passwords. After murdering her, he hid her body in the shed freezer and left for a cruise with his daughter and girlfriend, flying to New Orleans on February 2nd. They spent several days traveling before returning to Anchorage, where he resumed the ruse with the ransom photograph and note. Keyes' stoicism unsettled investigators. He offered details with no emotion, recalling events with clarity but detachment. Yet his precision helped police reconstruct the case and confirm the timeline. On March 25th, after verifying the site Keyes had indicated, authorities recovered Samantha's remains beneath a frozen section of Matanuska Lake. She had been dismembered, placed in garbage bags, and sunk using weights. For Samantha's family, the discovery brought both devastation and closure. The community, already in mourning, held vigils and memorials. Flowers, candles, and notes accumulated at the coffee stand, now permanently closed. Anchorage had lost a daughter, and now the man responsible was behind bars. But as investigators dug deeper, they realized that Samantha's murder was not an isolated act. Israel Keyes had left a trail, one that stretched far beyond Alaska's borders. Once Samantha Koenig's remains were recovered, investigators pushed Israel Keyes for more information. What they uncovered marked the beginning of a far more extensive and disturbing criminal profile. During numerous interrogations, Keyes began to speak in greater detail, gradually revealing the scope of his actions. Though initially reserved, he now admitted to a series of violent crimes spanning more than a decade. Samantha was not his first victim. She was his last. Keyes described his methodical approach to murder. He selected victims with care, favoring remote locations and people with minimal connection to him. He traveled extensively across the United States, often flying to one city, renting a car, and driving thousands of miles to obscure towns. His planning minimized digital footprints and reduced the likelihood of detection. He referred to his actions not as crimes, but as a project, carried out with deliberate precision. One of the most chilling aspects of his confession was the revelation of kill kits. Keyes admitted to burying supply caches, sealed buckets filled with weapons, restraints, and tools near areas he planned to return to. These kits were planted years in advance, allowing him to act on impulse with all necessary resources on hand. Law enforcement later uncovered several such kits, hidden near suspected crime scenes. He also revealed his involvement in the murder of Bill and Lorraine Currier in Essex, Vermont. In June 2011, Keyes flew to Chicago, rented a car, and drove over 1,000 miles to Vermont. There, he retrieved a kill kit he had buried 2 years earlier. He broke into the Currier's home, abducted them at gunpoint, and took them to an abandoned farmhouse, where he killed them and disposed of their bodies. The house was later demolished, complicating evidence recovery. but his detailed confession was enough to confirm his involvement. Despite confessing to at least 11 murders, Keyes refused to provide names or specifics in most cases. He maintained a measure of control, doling out information only when it suited him. His motivation appeared to be a combination of power, manipulation, and a desire to remain the architect of his own narrative. Keyes seemed to take pride in how long he had remained undetected. He avoided using firearms tied to him, refrained from killing near home, and never chose victims who might be easily traced back. His ability to compartmentalize his life, maintaining relationships, running a construction business, and raising a daughter, made him invisible to those around him. Law enforcement agencies across the country began reopening cold cases, scouring files for unsolved disappearances that matched his travel history. The FBI released a timeline of Keyes' known movements and solicited the public's help in identifying potential victims. While several cases were under investigation, the full extent of his crimes may never be known. Even as he confessed, Keyes remained emotionally detached. He offered no apologies and expressed no remorse. His calm, calculated recounting of events stood in stark contrast to the brutality he described. Samantha Koenig's case had unraveled the web, but Keyes had built it with extraordinary care, and much of it would remain shrouded in mystery. As the FBI and Anchorage detectives continued to interview Israel Keyes, a clearer but far more disturbing portrait emerged. He was not simply a murderer, but a meticulous and nomadic predator who operated with chilling precision. With no clear victim profile and no consistent method, he left behind few patterns for law enforcement to follow, until now. Investigators began piecing together his travel history through credit card records, cell tower data, rental car receipts, and flight logs. Between 2001 and 2012, Keyes had moved across the United States, visiting at least 35 states. He planned murders months, sometimes years in advance, burying kill kits in strategic rural areas. These kits were waterproof containers filled with items like guns, zip ties, duct tape, cash, and Drano for body disposal. Buried along hiking trails, abandoned farms, and remote forests, they were placed with the intent of enabling future crimes. One such kit was discovered in New York, another in Alaska, and yet others were suspected but never found. Keyes had mapped out potential crime scenes years before he acted. His lack of connection to victims was intentional. He chose people at random, often in isolated locations, and avoided any area he might be tied to. The FBI publicly confirmed that Keyes had admitted to at least 11 murders, including the Couriers and Samantha Koenig, but he refused to identify most of his victims by name. In some instances, he claimed to have dumped remains in bodies of water, or disposed of them in locations no longer accessible. The lack of physical evidence limited investigators' ability to confirm the full extent of his crimes. Keyes also admitted to multiple bank robberies used to finance his travel. He avoided using credit cards during his killing sprees, relying instead on stolen money or buried cash. These robberies were often carried out in small towns with limited law enforcement resources. Surveillance images linked him to at least 2 such robberies in New York and Texas. The FBI created a detailed timeline of his movements, marking areas where he might have killed. They released this information publicly, hoping to match his travel dates with unsolved homicides or missing person cases. Hundreds of leads poured in. Some cases were ruled out, while others remained under investigation. Despite the detailed confessions, Keyes was evasive when questioned about certain locations or individuals. He insisted on controlling the pace of information release, often pausing interviews and requiring breaks before continuing. Detectives believed he enjoyed the leverage his knowledge gave him. He was methodical even in custody. Meanwhile, forensic teams re-examined cold cases, searching for links to Keyes. While some similarities emerged, such as victims last seen near hiking areas or remote roads, conclusive evidence was elusive. He had taken extreme measures to avoid detection, including destroying evidence and selecting sites unlikely to be revisited. Keyes's tactics baffled even seasoned investigators. He did not fit traditional serial killer profiles. He had no clear motive beyond control and challenge. He operated across multiple jurisdictions, evading profiling tools that relied on geographical consistency or known victim-offender relationships. As interviews continued, the broader scope of his crimes became increasingly clear. Israel Keyes had used anonymity and mobility as his greatest weapons. And with each new detail, it became apparent that Samantha Koenig's murder was only one chapter in a far longer, darker story. On December 2nd, 2012, the investigation into Israel Keyes took a sudden and irreversible turn. Guards at the Anchorage Correctional Complex found Keyes dead in his cell. He had slit his wrists and strangled himself using bed sheets tied into a ligature. The discovery ended a months-long effort to extract information from the man suspected of at least 11 murders across the country. Keyes had been under close observation, but at the time of his death, he was not on suicide watch. He had shown no signs of imminent self-harm, though some jail staff noted that his behavior had grown increasingly erratic. He had expressed frustration at the slow pace of the legal process and the limits placed on his demands. His suicide appeared carefully planned, another reflection of his calculated nature. Found beside his body was a lengthy handwritten suicide note. It offered no new confessions, no names, and no closure. Instead, it was a disturbing, poetic manifesto filled with cryptic imagery, abstract references to death, and expressions of nihilism. It provided no insight into his motivations or his victims, only a final act of control in a case defined by manipulation. For law enforcement, Keyes's death was a devastating blow. It halted ongoing interviews and left many unanswered questions. Detectives had hoped to recover more details about other victims and the locations of unsolved crimes. His cooperation had been selective and conditional, and with his death, those leads were silenced. The FBI's behavioral analysts who had been studying Keyes' patterns were left to reconstruct the full scope of his crimes with limited data. They turned to digital archives, travel logs, and buried caches to fill in the blanks. While several cold cases remained under active review, the certainty that Keyes had murdered more people was widely accepted. Authorities continued to receive tips after his death. Some came from families of missing persons, hopeful for answers. Others were from communities where Keyes had traveled, prompted by newly released timelines. In response, the FBI maintained a Keyes-specific page, releasing maps and data in hopes that more victims could be identified. The Koenig family, already grieving the loss of their daughter, was devastated once again. They had held out hope that Keyes' cooperation might offer more information, not only for their own closure, but to help other families. His suicide, however, robbed them and many others of that possibility. In the months following his death, the Anchorage Correctional Complex conducted internal reviews. While no staff were held directly responsible, the facility faced criticism over the lapse in suicide prevention protocols. His death underscored the challenges of managing high-risk inmates, especially those as manipulative and intelligent as Keyes. For investigators, the focus shifted from interrogation to legacy. They aimed to piece together a complete account of Keyes' actions, hoping to bring justice to unidentified victims. Yet, as each thread was followed, they encountered the same grim realization. Israel Keyes had crafted a criminal life so carefully compartmentalized that many of his secrets might never be uncovered. Following Israel Keyes' suicide, the search for answers continued. While investigators processed the remaining evidence, public focus returned to the beginning, the abduction and murder of Samantha Koenig. Her body, recovered from Matanuska Lake in April 2012, had been returned to her family. They held a memorial service in Anchorage, where hundreds gathered to honor her life. Photos, letters, and flowers were laid near the now-closed Common Grounds coffee stand. The Koenig family, shattered by loss, became active in raising awareness about abduction cases. They spoke publicly about their experience, hoping to support others facing similar nightmares. Their efforts also helped maintain attention on the broader investigation into Keyes' crimes, keeping pressure on authorities to identify other victims. In Anchorage, the case left a lasting imprint. Businesses revisited security protocols, and public officials pushed for better surveillance and support for small business employees, especially those working alone. Community members launched self-defense initiatives and education campaigns for young workers in isolated environments. Samantha's case became a cautionary tale, one that exposed vulnerabilities in seemingly safe spaces. The FBI continued its investigation into Keyes' past. Analysts studied his known travel routes and compared them against missing person cases nationwide. In some regions, renewed searches were conducted. While the murder of Bill and Lorraine Currier had been confirmed through his confession, other cases remained speculative, lacking the forensic evidence needed to close them. Agents also worked to locate additional kill kits. Some were recovered, while others had likely been removed or never retrieved. Each discovery confirmed Keyes' extensive planning and underscored how far he had traveled to commit his crimes. His use of these caches made him especially difficult to track. Without digital footprints or direct connections to his victims, he had remained invisible to traditional investigative methods for years. In media coverage, Keyes was often labeled a new kind of serial killer, nomadic, without pattern, and without a clear motive beyond control and anonymity. Documentaries and news features examined the case, focusing on law enforcement's efforts and the psychological profile that emerged. His lack of remorse, high intelligence, and meticulous planning challenged long-standing assumptions about serial crime. Despite the attention, much about Keyes remains unknown. His suicide cut short what might have been a full accounting of his crimes. Dozens of families across the U.S. still wonder if their missing loved ones were among his victims. The FBI continues to receive tips, and agents routinely revisit the evidence, searching for connections. For Samantha's family, the grief has never left. They continue to speak in her memory, urging the public not to forget her or the lessons of her case. Her story, tragic and senseless, served as the entry point into one of the darkest criminal investigations in modern U.S. history. And while justice was partially served, many questions remain unanswered. The murder of Samantha Koenig and the exposure of Israel Keyes as a serial killer reshaped national understanding of criminal anonymity. Though law enforcement had long studied serial offenders, Keyes' ability to evade detection for over a decade challenged established assumptions. His case became a reference point for federal training, investigative strategy, and victim advocacy. In Alaska, legislative and community responses reflected the case's impact. Proposals for increased surveillance near kiosks and late-shift workplaces gained traction. Advocacy groups highlighted the dangers faced by employees working alone, and Samantha's name became associated with calls for better worker protection measures. Her story was cited in safety seminars, law enforcement conferences, and victim outreach campaigns. The FBI, faced with the realization that Keyes had likely killed many more than he admitted, continued building an extensive database. They maintained a dedicated page for information related to his known travel and suspected activity. Satellite imagery, receipts, and travel itineraries were compiled to create an intricate digital map, one used to compare against unsolved murders and missing persons. Public contributions to this effort helped generate leads, though definitive answers remained elusive. Behavioral analysts studied Keyes' methods, refining profiling techniques. His crimes underscored the risks posed by highly organized mobile offenders who leave no forensic trail and choose victims randomly. The case emphasized the importance of interjurisdictional cooperation, data sharing, and monitoring of financial transactions in uncovering criminal patterns. For the Koenig family, public life became a platform for remembrance and reform. They established outreach efforts in Samantha's name, speaking at events and engaging with victims' families nationwide. Despite the pain of their loss, they chose to keep her memory active in the fight for safety and justice. The media continued to explore the case through documentaries, podcasts, and investigative reports. Each iteration revisited the same core questions. How could someone with a stable public life harbor such darkness? How many victims remain unidentified? And what systems failed to catch him sooner? Though the final answers may never come, Israel Keyes' actions forced a reckoning. He demonstrated how meticulous planning, mobility, and disconnection from victims could allow a person to evade even the most advanced law enforcement tools. But his capture and the community's response also showed how collaboration, public vigilance, and persistence could expose even the most carefully hidden crimes. Samantha Koenig's name endures, not just as a victim, but as a symbol of a community's resolve. Her case remains a powerful reminder of the fragile line between safety and risk, and of the vigilance needed to protect the vulnerable. Though her life was taken, her story continues to influence policy, education, and justice long after the case was closed.